Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. Name's Travis Morgan. I've worked at Cotner Auto on the east side of Columbus since I was 22. Started out doing tires and oil. Now I mostly handle diagnostics and electrical, that sort of thing. It's a family-run place, sits behind a strip mall off East Broad, not far from Mount Carmel. Real basic layout, 4 bays, front office, fenced lot out back. This happened last October, near the end of the month. I remember because we had that real warm stretch for a few days, then it snapped cold overnight. I was closing alone that night. Dave, the other tech, had taken off early to deal with his kid's school thing, and Mr. Cotner had already left for the day. Wasn't a big deal. I'd stayed late plenty before. I liked having the shop to myself anyway. It's peaceful when the compressors stop running and it's just you and the tools. It was a Wednesday. I had a Ford Edge up on the lift in Bay 3, replacing a rear wiring harness that'd gotten chewed through. Possums or mice, hard to say. I had my music going low and was halfway through buttoning it back up when the lights flickered. Just once. Real quick. Everything cut for maybe half a second. Shop lights, music, even the laptop I had on the bench. Then it all came right back on. No breaker trip, no power surge alarm. Thought maybe AEP had hiccuped the grid, but nothing in the breaker panel looked off. We'd had some weird outages before, but usually not just a blink like that. Still, I didn't think much of it. Got back under the edge, zipped up the loom, and was torquing the bracket back in when all the motion sensors in the lot went off at once. Every single floodlight outside snapped on. Now, those lights are triggered by movement in 3 separate zones: front drive, side alley, and the fenced yard out back. They don't talk to each other. You can wave your arms in front of Bay 1 and not trip the ones out back, but they all lit up at the same exact second. I shut off my drill and stepped outside. It was cold enough I could see my breath, but still dead calm. No wind, no cars going by. The strip mall across the lot was closed up, lights off. The Pizza Hut 2 doors down was dark. I walked out past the garage doors and stood in the middle of the lot, looking around. No movement, no people, nothing I could see that should have tripped anything. But it was bright as hell now, all those floods on. Gave everything that weird flat color where it's hard to tell what time it is. I turned to head back inside when I noticed something overhead. 3 lights. Dim orange, spaced wide apart. They were coming in slow, real slow, from the west, just over the treetops behind the shop. No blinking, no sound, just steady glide. The way they moved, it felt heavy somehow. Like whatever they were attached to was big, but not struggling. At first, I thought maybe it was a low-flying plane, but the shape wasn't right. The lights were arranged in a triangle, with 1 leading and 2 behind, like a flat arrowhead. But the weird part was that I couldn't see anything between the lights. No outline, no structure, just 3 points moving in perfect sync like they were connected by something invisible. It passed right over the shop. Dead silent. I stood there, jaw probably half open, watching it crawl overhead. If I had to guess, I'd say it was moving maybe 15-20 miles an hour, slower than any plane I've ever seen. No wings, no fuselage, nothing reflective, just those 3 steady, orange glowing points. As it passed, I felt something weird in my chest. Not fear, exactly. More like pressure. Like being underwater. Hard to breathe for a few seconds. My eyes watered a little. Then it moved on, kept heading east until it disappeared over the strip mall. I didn't move until it was gone. Just stood there like a dummy. Once I snapped out of it, I jogged back into the office and pulled up the security feed. Nothing. I went camera by camera, front lot, back fence, alley, inside bays. Not a single frame showed anything but static lights and empty pavement. Even when I scrubbed through the exact moment I saw it pass overhead, the cameras stayed normal. No glitches, no dark shapes, no reflection from the floodlights, just nothing. But here's the kicker. All the motion sensors had tripped. The logs showed every single one going hot at the same time, 10:38 p.m. I checked the motion logs regularly because raccoons sometimes set off the back sensors. But this was different. It didn't make sense. Nothing showed up on the video, and there was no movement in the lot. Just that triangle passing over, like it didn't care about being seen, but somehow still wasn't seen. I shut everything down after that, locked up and drove home. Didn't sleep much. I didn't even tell anybody the next day, felt too strange trying to put it into words. A couple nights later, I came in to check on a parts delivery we'd missed, and I noticed the radio in Bay 2 was on. I hadn't used that one in weeks. The volume was low, and it was tuned to some AM station I don't listen to. Just static. Like someone had turned it on and left it. Nothing else was touched. Tools were all where I left them. Doors locked. But that radio had been off. I'm sure of it. Ever since that night, I've kept a flashlight in my truck. One of those big ones with the crank. No batteries. I don't trust the power like I used to. I don't know how to explain what I saw that night, but I'm still thinking about it, even weeks later. I'm Tom Reynolds, and I've been farming out here near Delaware, Ohio for most of my life. The farm's been in the family for 3 generations now. It's nothing fancy, just a couple hundred acres of corn and soybeans, the usual Midwest stuff. Quiet place, especially once the sun goes down. This all started right after the first big snow last December. I was out doing my usual morning rounds, checking fences, making sure the equipment was good, and that's when I noticed something weird in one of the cornfields I hadn't gotten around to harvesting yet. One row, maybe 50 feet long, had all its stalks bent sharply at about a 90-degree angle, right in the middle of the stalks, like someone took each stalk and folded it over. The weirdest part? The plants weren't broken or snapped, not even cracked, just bent perfectly. I mean, this wasn't your usual snow or wind damage, and it didn't look like deer or raccoon damage either. Usually, if something steps on a cornfield, you see broken stalks or crushed plants. But this looked deliberate, like some precise crease down the entire row. I ran my hand along a few stalks. They were stiff but intact, like cardboard that'd been folded sharp but not torn. No signs of heavy machinery, no tire tracks, nothing. The rest of the field was untouched, no footprints or anything near that row. Just that one precise line of folded stalks. I figured maybe it was some freak accident with the weight of the snow pressing down unevenly, but even then, it didn't sit right. Snow was light that morning, and the rest of the field looked fine. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, but they don't really capture how odd it was. That night, the farm was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that settles when the wind dies and all the usual nighttime sounds stop. Around 11:30 p.m., I woke up because of a noise on the roof. It was pacing. I don't know how else to describe it. Like something big was walking back and forth up there, slow but deliberate. Heavy footsteps, maybe 4 or 5 steps, then a pause, then the same pace again. It wasn't like an animal, no scratching or scurrying, more like something that weighs a lot but was careful not to make too much noise. I lay there frozen for a bit, listening. After a few rounds, the noise stopped, and I waited for a while but didn't hear anything else. When I got up the next morning, I went outside to check the roof. Nothing looked disturbed, no dents, no footprints, no marks on the shingles. It had snowed lightly overnight, so I was expecting at least some tracks, but the snow on the roof was untouched, smooth like glass. I walked around the house, the barn, the shed, no footprints anywhere near the house, no tire marks, no animal prints. The snow was clean, like no one had been out there all night. I felt uneasy. It was like the noise had been there, but nothing had left a trace. That day, I went back to the field to look at the bent corn again. When I got closer, I noticed something else. The row of folded stalks wasn't random. It formed a sort of pattern. I'm not saying it spelled anything out, but the way the bent stalks aligned created a repeating spiral shape, kind of like a loose coil running the length of the row. It was subtle, almost like the corn was pointing somewhere or trying to communicate, but I can't say for sure. I'm not one for wild stories, but it looked deliberate. I ran my fingers over the stalks again, and the cold of the night still felt like it was hanging in the air there, even though it was the middle of winter. The rest of the day was normal. I kept expecting someone to show up, a neighbor or the sheriff asking questions, but no one did. No calls, no reports. That night, I stayed inside with the porch light on, half expecting that pacing noise again, but nothing. Just the quiet. Over the next few days, I kept going out early to check the field, but the stalk stayed folded, no change. The spiral pattern stayed sharp and clean, like someone was maintaining it, though I never saw anything or anyone. I thought about setting up some cameras, but I'm old school. I don't trust all that fancy equipment, and besides, it felt like whatever it was didn't want to be caught. Like it was watching me as much as I was watching it. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of something moving near the tree line that edges the field. At first, I thought it was just a deer or maybe a stray dog, but whatever it was, it slipped into the woods without a sound. No rustling, no snapping branches, just gone. I told myself it was just my imagination. But then last week, I was working in the barn when the power went out. Not just my place, the whole area. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. The sky was clear, the stars sharp, but off in the distance beyond the trees I could see a faint glow. It wasn't the usual orange or white from a nearby town. It was bluish, almost like the color of a police cruiser's emergency lights, but steadier, pulsing softly. The glow lasted maybe 5 minutes before fading completely, and the power came back on just as suddenly. The whole thing felt like a message, though I can't say what. Now the corn's all harvested, and the field looks normal again. No bent stalks, no patterns, nothing. The snow has melted, the ground's soft and muddy. But sometimes when I'm out here alone, I swear I catch the same quiet pacing sound on the roof, or a flicker of that strange blue glow through the trees. And every time, the hair on my arms stands up. I don't know what's out there. I don't know if it's someone watching, something messing with the fields, or just the way my mind's trying to make sense of all this. But the one thing I'm sure of is that row of corn. That perfect, sharp fold, that spiral pattern. It wasn't an accident. And whatever walked my roof that night, it left no footprints. I was hauling a load from Cleveland down to Indianapolis one spring evening, rolling through northwest Ohio just past dark. I'm Dave Carter, been trucking for over 15 years out of Toledo, mostly flatbed runs and the occasional refrigerated trailer, nothing fancy. Anyway, this night I pulled off at the rest area near Lima to take a break and grab a bite from my cooler. It was one of those small, quiet spots, a few picnic tables, some dim streetlights, and the usual scattering of trucks parked along the lot. I shut off the engine and climbed out to stretch my legs. Right away, I noticed my phone was acting weird. Battery dropping faster than normal. I mean, I was at like 80% when I parked, but after just a couple minutes outside, it was down to 60. I figured maybe the cold was messing with it, but it wasn't even that chilly yet. I checked the phone again a little while later, 50%. That felt off. I pulled my jacket tighter and looked up. The sky was mostly clear, just a thin haze near the horizon, but then I saw it. A faint, dim orange glow hovering above the treetops on the far side of the lot. Not like the usual city lights or a sunset either. It was soft, like a lantern stuck in fog, but there wasn't any fog. It stayed there, unmoving, just hanging low in the sky. The orange light wasn't bright enough to cast shadows or light up anything around it, but you could tell it was there. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just tired or seeing things. I wasn't drinking or anything, just a long day on the road. Curious, I stepped away from the truck and checked my phone again. It had dropped another 10% in less than 5 minutes. Every time I moved further from the truck, the battery drained quicker. When I stepped back inside, it stopped. Weird, right? I fiddled with the keys, thinking I'd fire up the truck and keep moving, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Just that clicking sound like a dead battery. I figured maybe the truck's battery was finally dying, but the lights inside the cab came on fine. I tried a few more times, nothing. I wasn't too worried yet. I had jumper cables, and if it came to that, I'd call a buddy or the company for help. I decided to pace a bit, trying to clear my head. The orange glow was still there, sitting just above the tree line like it was waiting for something. I scanned the rest area with my flashlight. A couple of trucks farther down had their engines running, but no one was out. The weird part was the silence. No crickets, no distant cars driving by, not even the usual hum of the highway nearby. It felt like the whole place had been muted. After 10 minutes, I gave the engine another try. This time, it started right up. I was about to roll out, but the glow was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there at all. I checked my phone again. Battery was back to 78% and holding steady. I shook my head, thinking maybe my brain was playing tricks. I'd never experienced anything like that on the road before. As I pulled back onto the highway, my radio started crackling with static and faint voices, like someone was trying to talk, but it was too far away to make out. It only lasted a few seconds before fading out. I adjusted the dial, but nothing else came through. The rest of the trip was uneventful. I kept watching the sky for that orange glow, but it never showed up again. At home, I charged my phone fully and checked the battery health. No problems. The truck started fine the next day too. I don't know what that was. I don't have a clue. But I remember that glow, the way my phone drained, and how the truck wouldn't start until it disappeared. I just wanted to get home safe. I work maintenance for a small wind farm in southern Idaho. Nothing fancy, 12 turbines across a few hundred acres out past the Snake River. The kind of job where it's mostly just walking up and down dirt access roads, checking panels, grease points, cables, alone most of the time. This happened back in October. I'd just switched to the evening shift to cover for a guy whose wife went into labor. That meant I was out there from 2 p.m. to around 10. Not bad hours, really. But by the time I was doing end-of-shift checks, it was pitch black. That week had been quiet. No storms, no wildlife messing with the gear. I was mostly logging numbers and running diagnostics. I carry a handheld radio out there, standard issue Motorola, so I can check in every couple hours with dispatch or call the shop if something needs more hands. We use a set of fixed channels, all programmed into the unit. On Wednesday, I was doing a loop around turbine 9 when I started picking up static. Not full white noise, just little pulses, blips, like when you barely catch a transmission too far out. It wasn't sharp or high-pitched either. Low, faint. I thought maybe someone from the highway patrol or a nearby farm was bleeding over into one of our channels. Happens now and then. I checked the signal strength, 2 bars. Weird, but not impossible. I said something into the mic, just a simple Unit 3 checking channel, but there was no response, just that same intermittent pulse. I switched channels, same thing. Static again, but not constant. It would come for a second, then cut out, then another, sometimes 2 in a row. Like breathing. Not that I thought that at the time, just the rhythm of it. It stopped after about 10 minutes. I didn't report it because nothing seemed wrong. I figured some cross-channel bleed from a long-haul trucker or a farm crew out late. The next night it happened again, this time while I was on the northeast end near Turbine 2. Different location, but same radio, same signal strength. The weird part was it didn't show up when I was transmitting, only when I was silent. I'd key the mic, speak, and it would go quiet. As soon as I released it, the static came back. This time it lasted longer. I walked around a bit to see if it was tied to a specific direction or elevation, but it followed me, moved with me. It was low, too low to really make out anything beyond the pattern, but I started recording it with the voice memo function on the radio, mostly to show my supervisor as proof I wasn't imagining things. That night when I got home, I dumped the recording onto my laptop and played it back through headphones. The file was maybe 4 minutes long. First minute was me walking and breathing, gravel crunching under my boots, basic stuff. Then the static came in. I thought it was the same pulsing until I turned up the volume and realized it wasn't just static. There was something under it. Not a voice, exactly. No words. Just breathing. But not mine. It was too slow. I know how I sound when I'm walking, especially uphill, and this wasn't that. This was deeper. Inhale, hold, exhale, like one breath every 6 or 7 seconds. Long, drawn out, steady. And it wasn't behind the static, it was buried inside it. Like the static was the breath. I stopped the file halfway through, closed my laptop, and just sat there listening to my own house for a few minutes. Nothing was wrong. No one outside. It just felt off. Like I shouldn't be listening to it anymore. The next day, I brought the radio into the shop and asked if any of the techs had noticed weird interference on the evening shift. Derek, the only other guy who rotated nights, said no. He joked that maybe I was picking up some shortwave ham freaks or military stuff. I didn't tell him about the breathing. That night, I kept the radio on a different channel, one we don't normally use, channel 6. The static started up again around 9:15, right as I was wrapping up my checklist near turbine 12. This time I didn't hear the pulse. It was one long hiss, constant. Then, without touching anything, the hiss dipped in pitch, almost like a Doppler effect, but there was no movement. I looked around. No wind, no animals, nothing. I tapped the mic and said, "Unit 3, open comms. Anyone out there?" Silence. Then, after I let go of the button, another breath, louder this time. Not recorded, not in the headset. This was live through the speaker. It was the only thing I heard, just that inhale, then a long exhale. Not mechanical, but not quite human either. It sounded big, like a lung the size of a furnace. I backed away from the turbine, scanning the road and the edge of the field. I couldn't see anything past the first 10 feet. It's just empty scrub out there, no fences, no real trees, just sage and dirt and distant hills. I switched the radio off, dead silent. I turned it back on, no static. I left an hour early that night and didn't tell anyone. Friday was my last evening shift. The guy I was covering for came back, so I was just there to help close out the week. It was uneventful until the end. I was near the battery bank on the south end when the radio kicked back to life on its own. I hadn't touched it. It flipped from channel 1 to 3, then to 5, each time just static. Then it landed back on channel 2, our main channel, and stayed there. That's when I heard my own voice. Not live, a recording. Something I'd said the day before, "Unit 3, open comms. Anyone out there?" Then the pause. Then silence. Then the breath. It repeated, exactly the same. I shut the thing off and drove back to the shop. Didn't even finish the checklist, just signed the log and left the radio on the desk. When I came in the next week for my usual day shift, I grabbed a new unit. Didn't say why. The old one's probably still sitting in the drawer. Nothing strange since then. No static, no voices. I still have the recording on my laptop, but I haven't played it again. I drove long haul for about 15 years. Mostly east-west routes, Ohio to California or up into Washington when the weather was good. This happened in late March 2018, somewhere in Nebraska. I was hauling fertilizer out of Sioux City and headed down toward Colorado Springs. Route 83 most of the way. Not much out there except empty land and the occasional gas station with bad coffee. That stretch between North Platte and McCook is about as remote as it gets. Flat, long, dead quiet. No radio stations, barely any traffic. If you break down out there, you wait. I'd taken that route dozens of times before. But around mile marker 211, just past 9 p.m., I started hearing this sound on the CB. I wasn't talking to anyone, just had it on, like I always do. The volume was low, but I noticed this clicking. Mechanical, fast, almost like a typewriter. Not Morse code, not static. Just click, 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 evenly spaced, like something cycling. I turned the squelch knob up and down. Didn't help. It wasn't on channel 19 either. It didn't matter what channel I switched to, it stayed there. Low, just under everything, like it was embedded in the signal somehow. I figured it was bleed-through from some tower nearby, though I couldn't see anything around me. Just fields and a barbed wire fence under a clear sky. I was between markers 211 and 212 when I noticed something else. One of the stars wasn't staying still. At first I thought it was my windshield. I tapped it, nothing. Wiped the inside, still there. Every time the clicking sound hit a certain rhythm, 3 fast, 1 slow, that particular star would twitch slightly to the left, barely noticeable. Maybe an inch if you held your hand out, then it would stay put, like it was repositioning. That sequence repeated about every 40 seconds. I killed the CB completely. The clicking stopped, but the star still moved. I watched it while driving 65. It didn't blink like the others, just sat there, sharp and white, until the rhythm hit again. Then another small shift. Left. Pause. Nothing. I passed marker 213 and the star stopped moving. The rest of the sky looked normal again. I turned the CB back on. Quiet. Just the usual background hiss. Next night, I came back up the same stretch. Northbound this time. I was curious and I'll admit a little on edge. Around 9:20 p.m., I hit marker 213 again. A couple minutes later, passing 212, the clicking started. It was the exact same pattern. I slowed to 55 and leaned forward to look up through the windshield. That same bright point was there, just above the horizon ahead. Still. Then the clicking hit the sequence. 3 fast, 1 slow. The star shifted. Same direction. Left. Just a little. I tried talking on the CB, asked if anyone else was nearby, if they were hearing what I was. No answer. Didn't even get feedback. That was weird, because usually I'd get some squelch bounce even if nobody replied. Once I crossed 211, it stopped again. Clicking gone. Star held steady. I started timing it. Third night, I made a point of passing through around the same time. It was windy that night. You could see the grain in the fields rippling under the moonlight. When I got between 211 and 213, everything dropped quiet, like the wind cut off. That part freaked me out more than anything. No sound from the rig, no vibration from the road, just silence and those damn clicks. That night, I noticed something else. When the star shifted, my interior dome light flickered. Just once, a little pulse, like a voltage dip. Didn't affect anything else, gauges were steady, engine didn't hiccup, but the light definitely dimmed for a second. I kept both hands on the wheel and didn't touch the CB. The clicking carried on, soft and steady. It felt like something was checking in. That's the only way I can describe it, like a scheduled event. I drove through that stretch another 4 times in the next month. It happened every single time, only between mile markers 211 and 213, and only between 9:10 and 9:40 p.m. Never outside that window. I tried pulling over once, right at 212. Sat there idling with the CB on. The clicking got louder the longer I stayed. Not in volume, just in presence, like it was getting closer to the front of my brain. The star moved again. Then it kind of pulsed. Not a blink. It got slightly brighter for about half a second. The dome light flickered with it. Then I got the smell, like hot copper and ozone. I've only ever smelled that once before, after an inverter fried in an old cab. I threw it in gear and kept driving. I stopped taking that route for a while. Even when dispatch asked, I said I preferred going west through Ogallala. Cost me a few hours, but I didn't care. Last time I drove that section was in January 2020, right before I quit the road. Snow on the shoulders, full moon night, sky clear again. I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing. Then, around 9:15, the CB popped once. No clicking. Just a pop. Then silence. Not static. Silence. I looked up. The star was there. But this time it was already shifted, like it had been watching ahead of schedule. It happened on a Thursday evening, late July. I was walking my dog like usual, a black lab mix named Casey, around the block before it got too dark. We live in a small town outside Missoula, not rural exactly, but quiet. Just regular neighborhood stuff, chain link fences, gravel driveways, porch lights on timers. It had been hot all day. One of those dry Montana heat waves where the asphalt sticks a little under your shoes and you can smell pine sap baking on the trees. Even at 8:30, the air still felt like standing too close to an oven. Casey didn't seem to mind. She was trotting ahead on her usual loop around the corner, sniffing weeds and fence posts like always. We were halfway down Morgan Street when I noticed my breath. Just white fog in front of me, like it was January. I stopped walking, took another breath. Same thing. Clear little puff right there in the air. I looked down at Casey. She didn't seem to notice anything wrong, still sniffing a mailbox post like it owed her money. I turned in a circle slowly. No breeze, no weird sounds. The sun was still visible behind the trees, though low, just starting to touch the horizon. Then I actually felt it. The cold. It hit me across the chest first, like I'd walked into a walk-in freezer. No gradual drop, just bang. Cold. I looked at the hair on my arms, goosebumps all over. I pulled the leash a little to get Casey to move along. She hesitated, sniffed at the air, then started walking again. I swear in those next few steps, the air got colder. My ears stung. My nose started running. I glanced to my right and saw frost, actual frost, forming on a short metal fence post next to the sidewalk. That crusty silver layer just collecting fast like time-lapse footage. I stared at it, blinking, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I put my hand out toward it, but stopped an inch away. It was too cold. Not like a cool evening, like dead of winter cold, middle of summer, middle of the block, and my fingers were going numb. Casey growled, not loud, but low and steady. I looked down, and she was stiff, ears back, tail low. Then she barked once, sharp, and spun around on the sidewalk. She lunged so hard I stumbled back, but the leash was looped around my wrist. I held tight, bracing, and that's when it happened. The cold just vanished. It was like someone flipped a switch. 1 second I could see my breath and feel it in my teeth, and the next second it was just hot again. Sticky and dry, the way it had been all day. My breath didn't fog anymore. No frost on the post. Nothing. And Casey's leash, it was gone. I swear on everything, the leash that had been looped twice around my wrist just wasn't there anymore. I looked down at my hand. My fingers were still clenched like I was holding something, but nothing was there. Just my hand. Empty. I spun around. Casey was halfway down the street already, tail tucked, running in that weird half-hunched way dogs do when they're panicked. I shouted her name and ran after her. I wasn't thinking clearly. My heart was hammering, and I still felt like my arms had been dunked in ice water. She ran all the way home, 3 blocks, and was scratching at the front door when I caught up. I had to unlock it with shaking hands, and as soon as it opened, she bolted inside and hid under the table. I stood there on the porch for a second, just breathing. Everything looked normal. Crickets chirping, porch lights glowing. A couple houses had sprinklers running, mist catching the low light. But something about the street felt off, too still, too clean, like a stage set. Almost. Inside, I poured some water and sat down. Casey didn't come out for 10 minutes. When she did, she stayed close and wouldn't let me near the door again. I checked my wrist for marks. There were none. No rope burn, no redness. It was like the leash had never been there. Later that night, I went back outside just to check. I walked the same route we took. Same fence post, no frost. Nothing unusual. I even touched the metal. It was warm from the day's sun. The grass was dry and scratchy. The air didn't feel wrong anymore, but I couldn't get myself to finish the whole loop. I turned back early. The next morning, I checked the leash hooks by the door. Casey has 2, a long one for trails and a short one for neighborhood walks. The long one was there. The short one, the one I'd used the night before, was missing. I searched the whole house. Laundry room, couch cushions, car trunk, nothing. I even walked the street again in daylight, thinking maybe it had slipped off and I hadn't noticed. But it wasn't anywhere. I didn't drop it. I felt it on my wrist when it disappeared. We didn't go for a walk that night, or the next. I bought a new leash 2 days later. Same brand, same length, but it felt weird in my hand. Casey's been fine since, mostly. She still barks at the window sometimes when it's dark, but she always did that. I've never felt that cold again. Not like that. Not so fast or so deep. Sometimes I try to recreate the moment in my head, like what would happen if I hadn't stopped at that exact part of the sidewalk? If I'd crossed the street earlier, or if Casey hadn't been on a leash at all. Whatever that cold was, it came fast and left faster. But the space it took up, that patch of sidewalk, still feels different. Like air moves funny there. I don't stop on that block anymore. We cross the street without thinking. The leash never showed up. I'd set up my gear behind the old high school baseball field around 9:15 that night. It's the only spot near town that doesn't get too much light pollution, and the janitor doesn't care if I park back there as long as I clean up after myself. This was in Maple Ridge, small town in central Ohio. Not much going on after dark. I've been into amateur astronomy since college, and most nights I just try to catch a few meteorites or track satellites as they pass over. I had my Celestron Nexstar out and synced, nothing fancy, just enough to spot Jupiter's moons or catch some of the brighter Messier objects. It was one of those crisp, totally clear October nights, mid-40s, no clouds, and just the faintest wind coming in from the west. About 40 minutes in, I noticed a formation of lights coming in from the northeast, maybe 30 degrees above the horizon. I figured it was a group of military planes doing a night run. We're not far from Wright-Patterson, and once in a while they do exercises out here. There were 6 lights in total arranged in a V, like geese. Same brightness, spaced pretty evenly. They were white, not flashing, except 5 of them were blinking like normal aircraft. The 6th one, back right of the V, just stayed solid. No blink. That's what got my attention. They were coming in fast, but not silent. I could hear a low, distant hum, like a bunch of engines running together. Pretty standard. except that one unblinking light made no sound at all. I watched it for a while with my naked eye before checking my phone's flight radar app. Nothing listed in that direction. Not even the blinking ones showed up. That was odd, but not impossible. Military aircraft don't always show on civilian apps. I zoomed in on the formation with the telescope. The 5 blinking lights all showed faint outlines, wings, tail fins, heat shimmer behind them. Definitely jets. Probably F-16s or something like that. But the 6th one, it was just a light. No structure, just a perfect sphere of white, about the same size as the others visually. But it didn't distort or flicker. It didn't reflect light either. It was light. That was the first time I felt something was really off. I watched it a while longer and noticed it wasn't keeping perfect formation. It drifted a little, not lagging or speeding up, just sort of sliding sideways, slowly, against the wind. The rest of the group stayed tight. This one veered off about 5 degrees to the right, then corrected, then drifted again. And still, no blinking, no sound, no signal on the tracker. They flew over me at what I'd guess was 20,000 feet, maybe less. The jets rumbled low across the sky and eventually faded west. But the unblinking light didn't follow them. It stopped, right over the field. The other 5 kept going in perfect V, like it was never part of them to begin with. They didn't adjust, didn't loop back, just kept going until they vanished behind the tree line. The light hovered, dead still. I locked the telescope on it. Still just a bright sphere, pure white, no outline, no shadow. It didn't waver like stars do when they shimmer in the atmosphere. This thing was solid and unmoving, and again, not a sound. I watched it for maybe a full minute. Then it moved, straight up, no arc, no acceleration, just an immediate vertical climb. It was like watching a cursor on a screen being dragged upward, perfectly smooth. It rose until it was about twice the height it had been. Then it stopped again. I started shaking a little, not panicking, just that feeling when something doesn't match anything you've seen before. I've tracked satellites, watched the ISS pass over 100 times. This wasn't that. I backed away from the telescope and just looked up with my eyes. The light was dimmer now, higher up, but still the same steady white. Then it blinked. Once. A full second of brightness, then gone. I waited. Nothing. Checked the sky again. The wind picked up a little, brushing the field with that dry leaf rustling sound. I realized I was holding my breath. Then it blinked again. Another second-long flash, a few degrees higher than before. I had the sense it was still climbing. But the weirdest part? There was no transition. One frame it was dark sky, the next a bright light, like a strobe but soft. No flare, no fade. After that, it didn't blink again. It was just gone. I packed up quick. I didn't even bother with the lens caps, just tossed everything into the back of the Jeep and left. When I got home, I checked the satellite logs. Nothing passed overhead in that window. No weather balloons scheduled, no NOTAMs posted for military flights in the area. I haven't told anyone in town. It's the kind of place where people still talk about who's buying what kind of lawnmower. I'm already the space guy. Don't need to be the crazy one too. But I go out less now. I used to set up 3 or 4 times a week, now maybe once or twice a month, and I don't look at flight formations the same way anymore. I moved into my apartment in a quiet part of Salem, Massachusetts, late September last year. It's an old brick building on a side street. Nothing fancy, but it had decent rent and was close enough to the downtown area. I was mostly happy with it, close to work, near some parks, and the neighbors kept to themselves. The first few weeks went by normal enough. I was settling in, unpacking, figuring out my routines. The apartment has 2 big windows facing the street, one in the living room and one in the bedroom. There's a street lamp outside that casts a yellowish glow at night. I remember one of the first odd things I noticed was just how dark the corners of the room stayed, even with the lights on. That's not unusual in older buildings, but it was something I noted. The first time I saw it, I was lying on the couch, scrolling on my phone, and out of the corner of my eye, I caught a shadow just beyond the living room window. It wasn't a person or a tree. It was this dark, shapeless form, like a smudge or a silhouette. I looked directly toward it, but it wasn't there anymore. I figured it was just a trick of the light or my imagination. Over the next week, I kept catching glimpses like that, always in the corner of a room or just outside a window. The shape didn't have any clear edges or features, just a dark form that seemed to hover. It never moved toward me, not really, but it was always there, as if watching from a distance. I told myself I was just tired or stressed from work. My schedule had been kind of rough, and I was working late hours. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling grew heavier. One night, maybe a week after I moved in, I was in the kitchen making dinner when I saw the shape again, this time in the corner between the living room and the hallway. I blinked, looked right at it, and it faded away like smoke. I stood still, trying to tell myself it was a shadow from the street lamp or my own eyes playing tricks. But the way it disappeared wasn't natural. No flicker, no distortion, just gone. A couple of times, I thought I heard very faint noises, like a soft rustling or whisper, when the apartment was otherwise silent. But whenever I tried to listen closely or trace the sound, it stopped. I mentioned it once to my friend Clara when she came over. She joked about ghosts, but I didn't laugh. I just said maybe it was stress, and we dropped it. The most unsettling thing happened one evening when I was getting ready for bed. I had just finished brushing my teeth, and as I passed the bedroom window, I caught the shape again, standing just outside in the shadows under the tree. I froze, heart pounding, and stared hard. It was darker than the night, like a silhouette that absorbed light. It didn't move. After a few seconds, I blinked, and it was gone. That night, I left the curtains open to see if it would show again, but nothing appeared. In the following days, the sightings happened more often, sometimes twice a day. I tried changing the lighting, closing curtains, turning on lamps, but it made no difference. The shape was always just at the edge of my vision, never fully there, never close enough to touch or confront. I started noticing that my phone would sometimes glitch in weird ways when I was near the windows, apps freezing, the screen flickering, or the camera failing to open. One night I tried to take a picture of the shape outside the window, but the camera just showed static. I deleted the photo, thinking maybe my phone was acting up. I checked the building's history online, looking for any stories or reports, but found nothing unusual. No record of anything strange, no previous tenants mentioning odd events. The neighbors were friendly but private. No one brought it up. One weekend, I stayed home all day, trying to distract myself with cleaning and reading. That evening, I sat in the living room with the lights off except for a small lamp. I felt the usual presence at the edge of my vision. This time, instead of fading, the shape seemed to hold steady for a longer moment. I blinked and looked directly, but it didn't disappear immediately. It was like it was waiting. I didn't move for a while, just stared. Then the air seemed heavier, colder, but not like a draft, more like a weight pressing down. The hairs on my arms stood up. After maybe a minute, the shape slowly melted away, drifting out of sight like smoke blown by a gentle wind. I sat there, trying to calm down. The silence felt different afterward, deeper. I realized I'd been holding my breath. After that night, I started keeping a journal of when the shape appeared, what time it was, and how I felt. There wasn't a pattern, but it always happened in the late afternoon or evening, never in the morning. The feeling of being watched stayed with me constantly. I tried talking to people about it, but no one could explain it. Some said it sounded like sleep paralysis or just shadows caused by bad lighting, but it never fit perfectly. One night, I noticed the shape was outside the bedroom window again, but this time it seemed farther away, almost at the edge of the yard. I opened the window a crack to see if I could hear anything, but there was only the sound of wind through the trees. Nothing else. The next morning, I found some branches on the ground beneath the window, broken and scattered like something had brushed past. But there were no footprints, no disturbance in the dirt, just the broken twigs. I started feeling exhausted, not just tired, but drained. I thought maybe I was getting sick or just stressed, but my doctor said I was fine. Eventually, I told myself I needed to change something. I installed better curtains, tried bright daylight bulbs, rearranged the furniture. Nothing stopped the shape from appearing. Then one evening, after a long day at work, I came home and the shape wasn't where it usually showed up. I checked every corner, every window. It wasn't there. For the first time in weeks, I felt some relief. That night, I slept with the windows open and the lights off, something I hadn't done in a while. The air felt fresh. I woke up at 3 a.m. hearing a soft tapping on the living room window. I sat up, heart pounding, and saw nothing outside. No shape, no shadow, just the empty street and the quiet trees. Since then, the shape hasn't come back as often. Sometimes I catch it flickering in the corner of my eye, but it doesn't linger. The feeling of being watched isn't as strong. I don't know if it moved on or if I'm just used to it now. I still don't understand what it was or why it was there. It never tried to hurt me or communicate, just watched and faded away. Power went out just after dinner. Fairbanks can get like that. 1 minute everything's humming along, and the next, the whole neighborhood's swallowed in silence and darkness. I'm Matt Olson, by the way, born and raised in this town, so I'm used to the cold, the long nights, and the occasional quirks that come with living up here. But that night was something else. It started about 7 p.m. I was sitting in my living room just finishing up a frozen pizza when all the lights flickered once and then died. No warning, no buzzing transformers or anything, just gone. I figured maybe a storm had knocked something out or the power company was having a hissy fit again. It happens more than you'd think. I grabbed a flashlight and went to check outside. The street was pitch black, the only illumination from the moon hiding behind thin clouds. No streetlights, no headlights, just the usual quiet that settles in when the city powers down. Then, from the corner of my eye, I noticed this bright light hovering maybe 30 feet above the road in front of my house. It was a sphere, perfect, like a glowing orb, and it wasn't moving at all. No blinking, no flashing, just a steady white-blue glow that lit up the street beneath it. At first, I thought it was a drone or some kind of spotlight from the neighbor's house, but everything else was dark, and there was no noise, no drone hum, no engines, not even the buzz of electricity like from a transformer. Just this silent light hanging there, like it was holding its breath. I pulled my jacket on and stepped out onto the porch, flashlight in one hand, phone in the other. I tried calling a few numbers to see if the outage was widespread, no signal. Then I tried to turn on the porch light. Nothing. All the electronics nearby were dead silent. I remember feeling this odd quietness, not just because of the blackout, but something about that light. It was so calm, like it didn't belong to the night at all. I pointed my flashlight directly at it and gave a quick flick, like a blink. The orb didn't blink back, but it shifted slightly, just a bit to the left, almost like it was aware I was there. I backed up onto the lawn, eyes glued to that glow. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but the signal was gone on my phone. The house phone was dead, and even the car key fob wouldn't respond. Then my digital watch stopped ticking. After maybe 5 minutes, maybe more, it's hard to say, the orb began to fade slowly, dimming until it was just a faint shimmer and then nothing. The power didn't come back right away either. It was still out for a solid half hour after the light disappeared. When the lights finally flickered back on, everything snapped back to life. The clock on the microwave, my phone signal, even the car key fob beeped like nothing had happened. I was standing there on the porch feeling like I'd just seen something impossible but completely silent. I never saw anything like that before or since. No fireflies, no drones, no planes, just that sphere, glowing, quiet, and then gone. I told a few people in town the next day, but most just smiled and said, probably just a weather balloon or some military testing. Maybe, but if it was, why did all my electronics die? And why didn't it make a sound? I keep thinking about how still it was, how the air seemed to hold itself tight around that thing. It wasn't threatening, but it wasn't normal either. It was like the whole world paused just long enough for me to see something I'm still not sure I saw. I'm back to the usual routine now, but sometimes when the power flickers or the night gets extra quiet, I find myself looking up, wondering if that light's still out there, just watching. I'm Gabe Carlson, a field tech with the Arctic Wildlife Study Team. We set up camp every spring on a stretch of tundra near the Brooks Range out past Prudhoe Bay. It's a rough spot, miles from any real civilization. Mostly frozen wasteland with low shrubs and snow even in early May. This was the first time I'd worked the tundra in late spring, when the ice is starting to thin but the nights still drag on long and cold. We were there for a week, tracking caribou and testing remote sensors. Nothing out of the ordinary was supposed to happen, but then it did. That night, I was on watch, sitting just outside our tent cluster, sipping coffee from my thermos. The others were winding down inside. The sky was clear, the stars bright but way off in the distance, and the air dead still. Not even a breeze stirring. I was looking out over the snow when I noticed something low and bright, just hovering maybe 50 feet from camp. It wasn't moving, not like a plane or a helicopter. It was this steady, almost unnatural white glow, brighter than any flashlight or headlamp, but without that harsh beam. It kind of lit up the snow around it like a big lantern, but with this weird evenness, no flicker or shadow. At first I thought maybe it was one of the satellite trackers we had set up, but none of those give off light. Or maybe a nearby campfire. But we were out here alone, no other teams near enough for that. I stepped closer, my boots crunching softly, but the light stayed perfectly still. The weirdest part was how silent it was. No hum or buzz, nothing at all. I called out to the others, but when I looked back toward camp, the tents were dark and quiet. Everyone was supposed to be inside by then, but it felt like a long time had passed. I checked my watch. It was 1:13 a.m. I blinked and the light suddenly went out, like someone had switched off a lamp. 1 second it was there, the next, nothing. I called for the others again, but there was no answer. I started back toward the tents, but as I did, my head felt fuzzy, like the air was thick, and my thoughts were slow. I stumbled a little, trying to shake it off. When I got inside, the guys looked up at me, surprised. They said I'd been gone for almost 2 hours. That didn't make sense. I could swear it'd been maybe 10 minutes, tops. I checked my watch again. It was dead, frozen at 1:13. I looked around and the others all had the same thing. Their watches stopped at the same time. We stepped back outside and the spot where the light had been was weird too. The snow was crushed in a perfect circle about 10 feet across, like someone had pressed down hard or maybe stomped around in a ring. But no footprints, no signs of anyone being there. Just the snow packed flat, unusual and out of place. We all felt off after that, like our brains were scrambled a bit. One of the biologists, Jessie, said she felt like she'd been dreaming but couldn't remember what about. Nobody could explain how the watches all stopped at the exact same second. For the next day, we kept an eye on the spot. Nothing returned, no strange lights or sounds. The snow slowly started to settle back into place, but that circle stayed there. A flat, unnatural ring in the middle of untouched snow. We finished our work, packed up, and headed back to Purdue Bay. Even now, I can't explain what happened. The whole thing was quiet and slow, but it changed the way I think about this place. The tundra, the long nights, and what might be out there in the silence. Sometimes when I'm home in Anchorage, I catch myself staring at the time on my phone or watch, wondering if maybe there are moments missing that I'll never get back. I was stationed at a fire lookout tower near Denali that summer, one of those old wooden rigs perched on a ridge where you get a clear view of miles of wilderness. My name's Jake Merrick, and I'd been doing lookout work off and on since I was a kid, family tradition mostly. The job's simple in theory. Watch the forest for fires, report any smoke or danger over the radio, then pass the long stretches of quiet with reading or napping. But that week in late July didn't follow the usual script. It started on the second night. I'd been sitting on the deck just after midnight, scanning the dark horizon with my binoculars when I noticed something odd. There were these lights, slow moving, drifting across the sky in a pattern that didn't quite make sense. They weren't airplanes or helicopters. They didn't have blinking red or green lights like any aircraft I'd seen, just steady, pale glows, sort of white, but with a faint blue tint, and they moved smoothly, almost floating rather than flying. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe the haze from the humidity was messing with my vision, but the lights kept appearing and disappearing in the same way, sometimes clustering, sometimes spacing out like they were patrolling a route. I tried to radio the ranger station to see if anyone else was seeing this, but the radio just crackled. No response, and no matter how many times I keyed the mic, the static stayed stubborn. The interference was strange because my radio was usually rock solid. I even tried my backup handheld, same deal, just a low, humming static that buzzed under any attempt to speak or listen. I was stuck in silence except for the hiss. That first night, I chalked it up to some weird atmospheric interference or a glitch in my radio gear. The forest gets quiet at night, but sometimes the electronics have their own quirks. I figured I'd call the station first thing in the morning and check if anyone else had radio trouble. But the next night, same thing. The lights came back, moving slow and steady across the sky. I tried to snap some photos with my phone, but the camera couldn't quite catch them. Just fuzzy blobs, nothing clear enough to show anyone. The radio was dead again. Over the following days, the pattern kept up. Lights drifting silently, radio silent except for static. It was like the tower was cut off from the world every night around midnight and stayed that way until dawn. What really got under my skin was how the dogs from the nearby cabins reacted. I could hear them barking off in the distance when the lights showed up, but it was an uneasy kind of barking. Low, growly, not the usual, "Hey, there's a stranger" bark. Almost like they sensed something unnatural in the air. I started keeping a log, noting the times the interference began and ended and the position of the lights. They always hovered low, just above the tree line, moving west to east, then disappearing as the sun began to rise. One night, about halfway through the week, I was walking along the narrow path from the tower to the helipad when I caught a glimpse of something behind the trees. I stopped dead, heart pounding. It was a shape, tall and slender, standing still but clearly watching. No sound, no movement except a slight shimmer in the air around it like a heat haze or a mirage. I called out, my voice cracking. Nothing. I flicked on my flashlight, swung it toward where I saw the figure, but the beam just hit empty space. When I looked again, it was gone. Just the quiet forest, nothing moving. I tried to shake it off as a trick of the light or a deer standing in the shadows, but it didn't feel right. I felt eyes on me for the rest of the walk back, like the forest itself was watching. The radio interference started up again just after midnight that night. I couldn't reach anyone, no matter what frequency I tried. The lights appeared, hovering and drifting in that same slow pattern. I kept my eyes on them, but after a while I realized I wasn't hearing the usual sounds of the forest. No wind in the pines, no insects buzzing, just a deep, unsettling silence. It was as if the entire world outside the tower had gone still. I don't know how long I stood there watching, but time felt weird. My watch showed almost an hour passing in what felt like minutes. When I finally shook myself loose and looked away, the lights vanished one by one, fading into the gray sky. The next day, I checked in with the ranger station again, this time with a landline phone from the nearby cabin. They had no reports of any strange lights or radio issues. The folks there seemed to think I was just dealing with bad weather or poor radio reception. It was frustrating. I'd spent nights alone, cut off from help, staring at these unexplained lights and feeling that eerie silence press in. The whole thing felt like it was happening just for me, or at least only I was noticing. On the last night, I decided to stay up until dawn to see if anything changed. The lights came again, the radio hummed its static, and the dogs in the distance barked softly but steadily. I watched as one of the orbs slowed down, hovering almost directly above the tower. It pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. I kept my gaze fixed, my hands trembling in the cold air. The light grew dimmer and started to dissolve, but before it disappeared completely, I thought I heard a soft, almost musical hum vibrating through the air. Not loud, but enough to make my skin crawl. Then the radio snapped back on, clear and crisp, for a split second. I heard the ranger's voice calling my name. I reached for the mic, but the connection cut out as fast as it came. Silence again. Morning came, and with it the usual sounds of the forest returning, birds calling, wind rustling. The world went back to normal, like the night's strange occurrences had been a bad dream. I packed up and left the tower the next day. Back in town, everything felt louder, busier, and less mysterious. I still think about those nights, about the lights drifting overhead, the silence that wasn't natural, the shape in the trees that disappeared before I could get a good look. I don't know what it was. No one else seems to have seen it. And maybe that's the weirdest part. But whatever it was, it left me with a feeling that some parts of the wild aren't meant to be understood, just watched quietly from a distance. I was wiping down the counter at Black Rock Cafe just as the sun dipped behind the ridge. Outside, the sky over the old quarry was bruised purple, just the way people said they saw weird lights there. I'd heard it all night. Flash stories, rumors of glowing orbs bouncing off the limestone walls. None of it mattered to me until a customer who called himself John leaned in and said, "You ever see anything up at Miller's Pit? Last night I was driving home and these orange spheres just hovered over the blasted rock face. No sound, just they hovered and then they blinked out." I nodded and poured his espresso, half listening, half focused on the milk steaming too hot. He kept talking. 15 feet wide at least. I wanted to get out and get a photo, but as soon as I hit record, it flickered, like it didn't want to be on camera. He shrugged as he sipped. Maybe I was seeing things. He tipped back in his chair, staring at the empty road beyond the window. I was about to ask more, figured I'd heard the story before, when the door chimed. In walked a man in a black suit, no tie, crisp white shirt, shoes polished enough to reflect the neon cafe sign. He paused in the threshold, scanning the room like someone doing a head count, but he didn't meet my eyes. He didn't order anything. Instead, he walked straight to the table where John sat and slipped into the booth opposite him. The cafe was practically empty, just me, John, and one other regular zoned out over a latte, and when the stranger sat down, the fluorescent lights overhead seemed to dull. John froze, mid-sip, his brow furrowed. He set the cup down and said, "Can I help you?" The man just stared, hands flat on the table, shoulders locked. He didn't nod or glance at the menu board. After a long beat, he said in a quiet, even tone, "Tell me about the lights." That was it. No apology, no hello. He didn't flash any ID or business card. John swallowed and said, I was just talking about them. I saw lights, orange, hovering." The man leaned forward a fraction and asked, "Where exactly?" He spoke like a machine, each word deliberate. John rattled off the back roads, naming gravel cutoffs and abandoned cabins. The man didn't take notes. He just nodded once and sat back, expressionless. I cleared the counter, heart thumping. Every few seconds I glanced over, half expecting the stranger to dissolve into mist like one of those alleged orbs. But he stayed there, watching John. Not leaning in, not scribbling, just sitting perfectly still. When John finished his cup, he pushed back his chair, said, "I've got to go." The man didn't move. John's eyes flicked to me, and he gave a small wave like he needed me to acknowledge something about the guy. I nodded, dropped the tip jar into the register, wiped my palms on my apron, and watched John stand. The man in black said, "Be safe." His voice was too flat for comfort, like a robot trying sincerity. John hesitated, then hurried out without looking back. He sent me a text 2 minutes later. He's still sitting there. I looked. Empty booth. The suit was gone. No one else in the cafe, just a faint scent of cinnamon and espresso. I locked the register and turned off the neon sign as the other regular left. The door latched behind me with a final click. My hands shook as I flipped the closed sign over. I walked out to the parking lot under that bruised sky, half expecting the man to be leaning against the passenger side of my car, but there was nothing. Just John's Prius at the curb, wrapped in fog. I got in my beat-up sedan and drove home on Route 47, windows down, despite the chill. The quarry lay on my right, silent and dark except for the distant glow of a single street lamp. I fought the urge to turn into the gravel access road, even though I knew better than to chase a ghost story in the dark. At home, I set my keys on the hallway table and flicked on every light. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no unknown texts. The only message was John's. I stared at it, wondering if maybe he'd gone back to be watched again. I booted up my laptop to play some music, but the quiet click of the fan sounded too loud, too mechanical. I reached for the phone to text him back, "You okay?" But stopped. What could I say? I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching the steam curl upward. Outside, soft headlights passed on the street. I thought I saw a dark shape at the window. No, just the neighbor's cat. My heart eased slightly. I opened my laptop and pulled up the local news site. Nothing unusual. Municipal meetings, a story about a high school band, someone's missing cat. No mentions of lights or suits or secret meetings in coffee shops. Sleep didn't come easy. I checked the alarm clock at 1:03 a.m., then again at 1:19. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps on gravel. I lay awake until 3:30, half expecting a knock on the door. Morning light felt weak and pale. I brewed coffee and stared out the window at the empty street. I considered calling John. Maybe he'd seen the man again, maybe he'd had his lights flicker back on, but I didn't call. I just poured the coffee, adding too much cream so it tasted sweet. I left the house at 7:15 for my shift, same route past the quarry. Headlights cut like knives through the mist. Pine trees loomed on either side. No glow, no sign of anyone standing by the cut line. I parked at the cafe lot and braced myself before stepping inside. The door chime rang. I set down my keys and forced a smile for the morning rush. A few regulars sat at the counter, but no suits, no staring. The neon sign hummed back to life. I wiped the bar top and wondered if the man was still out there, somewhere in the fog, taking notes, waiting for another sighting. I handed a cappuccino to a customer named Marisol and leaned against the edge of the counter. She said, "You okay? You look tired." I shrugged. "Long night." She nodded and sipped her drink. I glanced at the empty booth where John and the stranger had sat. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck like someone was watching from outside. I looked through the window, just mist and cones of streetlight. I turned back and tossed my cloth into the rag bin. The espresso machine hissed. I dropped a puck into the knockbox and reached for beans for the next grinder. The lights overhead felt too bright, too harsh. I thought about closing early, but I put on a soundtrack of mellow jazz instead. Lunch came and went. No one asked about the quarry lights. No one mentioned a man in a suit. It was like last night hadn't happened, or like everyone agreed not to ask. By evening, the quarry had faded into memory. I locked up at 9:15, set the alarm, and walked to my car. The sky was clear, the stars steady points of light. As I drove away, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark eyes, pale face, a question left hanging. I didn't look back. I kept going, headlights on, fog behind me fading, waiting for something new to blur the line between what I'd seen and what I'd been told. I heard the rumble before I saw the missile launch. It was just before dawn at the test range south of White Sands, and the sky was overcast, thick gray clouds low enough to tint the rising sun. I'd driven out the night before, camped in my car by the observation bunker, waiting for the scheduled test. My name's Mara Jensen, freelance aerospace journalist, and I'd been chasing missile launches for 2 years. At 6:02 a.m., the alert horn sounded. I raised my DSLR to my eye and framed the pad through the bunker's slit window. There was a bright flash, then the missile's contrail cut through the clouds like a white ribbon. Jet noise filled the air, turning from a deep roar to a distant whine as it climbed out of sight. I snapped off a dozen shots, lowering the camera only when the sound faded. That's when I saw it, a lone figure backlit by floodlights near the service road. It stood by the chain-link fence, shoulders squared at attention, head tilted slightly forward. No safety vest, no helmet, just a dark suit, stark against the gray morning. I raised the lens and zoomed in. The figure didn't move. I ducked under the window and headed out the door, camera in hand. By the time I reached the fence, the test crew had pulled back to their vehicles, and the road was empty except for the gravel and stray ribbons of parachute hardware. The figure should have been there, but it wasn't. I circled the perimeter, peered through glare tape, and checked every shadowy corner. Nothing. No footprints, no crushed grass, no trace of anyone standing there. My heart thumped. I tapped my radio. "Range control, this is Jensen. Do you have an observer at the south fence?" No answer. Radio silent. I started walking back to the bunker when I heard a soft click behind me. I spun. There, under the flood lamp, stood a man in a black suit. White shirt, narrow black tie, shoes polished too bright for gravel. His posture was too perfect, like someone dressed him. I swallowed. My feet felt glued to the ground. He raised a hand in a small wave. I said, "Excuse me, are you?" But he cut me off. "Ma'am." His voice was calm, clipped. "This area is off limits." I held up my press badge. "I'm with Defense Tech Weekly. I have permission for photos." He shook his head. "Permission revoked." He took a step closer. "Please return to the bunker." His face was pinched in that odd way. No expression, but not unfriendly. I glanced toward the clock on the bunker wall. 6:15. I'd spent 10 minutes looking for that first figure, but it felt longer. I said, "Sir, I saw someone here before. Dark suit standing at the fence. Did you see them?" My voice was half plea. He cocked his head. No. He checked his watch. Now please step away from the fence. I raised the camera. Can I get a quote on why I'm being escorted? I pressed record. He smiled once, a faint tilt of the mouth, and shook his head. No, area is secured. He sighed like he hated doing this. Are you going to comply? My fingers hovered over the shutter. I didn't want to back down. But the hair on my arms prickled. I stepped away, lowering the camera. He nodded, turned, and strode off into the shadows behind the service road. His shoes didn't crunch, they glided. I watched until he disappeared. Then I walked back to the bunker, mind buzzing, camera dangling. The test crew was gone, all their vans pulled off the road, the bunker door was locked, no one inside. I waited until 7 a.m., then drove down to the main gate. The security guard looked at me like I was lost. I flashed my pass. He said, "Range closure? You must have missed the memo." I said there was no memo. He just shrugged and punched the gate code. "You shouldn't have been here," he said. Back on the highway, I checked the photos. The missile blasts were fine, bright arcs in the cloud cover, but every shot of the fence line had a dark blur in the corner, a shape like a standing figure, then gone. I zoomed in. The blur had edges like fabric, but no detail. Then it was gone in the next frame. I called my editor at 8:15. I tried to tell her about the man in black, about seeing him under the flood lamp, but my voice cracked. She said the range was tight with security for the new hypersonic tests, so they'd scrub photos if there was anything sensitive. I said, "What about the guy in the suit?" She told me to run the launch pics and file the rest under shelf stock. I sat at the diner half a mile off base, spooning coffee. My camera bag rested on the seat beside me. I stared at the windows, expecting to see him in black standing there, but nothing. Just highway and scrub pines. I left my card with the waitress and walked to my car. In the passenger seat lay a sealed manila envelope. Stamp date 6/12, no return address. Inside, 2 prints of my photos cropped close to the fence line and a single slip of paper, no further inquiry. I folded it, tucked it back in the glove box, and drove home, feeling like I'd just woken from a half-remembered dream. The highway stretched on, yellow lines fading into dawn, and I kept thinking I'd see that dark figure in my rear view. Perfect posture, black suit, unblinking eyes. I didn't. I just kept driving until the city lights rose ahead. I walked out of the cabin just before sunrise, the sky a pale slate blue, with low clouds hanging over the pines. Baxter, my mutt, thumped along at my heel, ears perked for squirrels or deer. I'd been doing this trail for years, 2-mile loop through national forest land near Cedar Creek, but that morning felt different. The air was damp, like it had rained overnight, and the usual chorus of birds was strangely muted. We followed the dirt path until it forked near a small brook. Baxter splashed in the shallow water while I wrung out my shirt sleeve and drank from my canteen. That's when I saw it, a break in the trees off to my left, maybe 30 feet from the trail. I'd never noticed a clearing there before. Curious, I crossed the wet ground and pushed through a few branches. The clearing was maybe 20 feet across, ringed by half a dozen mature oaks and maples. Each tree had its bark stripped away in a perfect band from the base up to exactly 6 feet, not 1 inch higher or lower. The exposed wood was smooth and pale, like someone had shaved it clean with a razor. No ragged edges, no splinters or chips on the ground, just tidy, horizontal lines circling every trunk. Baxter sat at the edge of the clearing, hackles slightly raised, staring in. I stepped forward, peering at the nearest oak. I ran my finger along the stripped surface, cool, almost slick to the touch. No tool marks, no grooves, nothing to suggest an axe or saw, just gone. A chill slid down my spine. I glanced back toward the trail. No footprints in the mud, no broken branches, no discarded bark anywhere. I swept my flashlight beam along the forest floor. Fallen leaves lay untouched by bark or boots. Baxter whimpered once. I crouched and put a hand on his collar. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, trying to calm him, though I felt anything but calm. He wouldn't step into the circle, shaking his head as if the ground burned. I reached into my pocket for the phone, but realized there was no signal this far in. I clicked it off. I circled the clearing, measuring in my head, exactly the same height on each tree, exactly level. Someone had to have done it intentionally. But who? And why here? In the middle of nowhere? I called Baxter to me. He padded up to my side and pressed against my leg. I patted his head, heart thudding in my chest. I was about to tell him to follow me back to the trail when I heard something, soft, like a breeze brushing needles overhead. But the air was still. The fog pressed close around the clearing, muffling sounds. Birds stayed silent. Even the brook's rush sounded distant. I shined my flashlight into the canopy. Through the low clouds, a sliver of light showed waving branches, but nothing moved. No wind. I felt watched. I took one more look at the stripped bark, memorizing the crisp edge. Then I turned and hurried back to the trail, Baxter at my heels. Leaves crunched underfoot, normal sounds returning once I was out of the clearing's hush. The forest seemed relieved, as if that circle had held its breath and let it out when we left. I reached the cabin shaking. My hands fumbled for keys. Inside, I closed the door behind me and leaned back against it, panting. Baxter scratched at the wood, whining. I scooped him into my arms, his fur damp, his eyes wide. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring out the window at the woods. The fog drifted between trunks, hiding the ground. I wondered if I'd dreamt it, but the chill in my fingers said otherwise. I texted my friend Aaron, who'd done forestry work nearby. Ever heard of bark stripping like that? Perfect bands, no damage around, no tracks. No reply. I turned off the lights and left the window open. My porch light lit the edge of the trail but reached no farther. All day, I avoided the clearing. I kept the curtains closed, checked the locks on the door. Baxter followed me around, sniffing corners, uneasy. I called Ranger Station in town, left a voicemail describing the spot. No one called back by evening. That night, I dreamed of trees bending down to peer through my window. Their trunks were smooth bands of white, stepping toward me on invisible roots. I woke when Baxter whined at the bedroom door and pawed to come in. I let him up, and he climbed onto the bed, turning his head toward the darkness outside. In the morning, I went back, this time with a notebook and a tape measure. Sunrise sliced through the fog, but when I reached the clearing, the light band was gone. The bark had regrown. Not fully, but a thin, papery layer covered the wood, scabby and irregular. The 6-foot mark was barely visible, worn by night's condensation. No fresh cuts, no debris. A few tufts of light-colored flake clung to the roots, but they disintegrated when I touched them. I sat on a fallen log, writing down my measurements. Even the leaves looked altered. Edges curled, color paler near the tree line. Baxter sniffed at the ground, nose twitching. He wouldn't step into the center, same as before. I took photos, marking the GPS coordinates, then backed away. The forest returned to normal, birds singing, breeze fluttering. I walked the trail out without looking back. That afternoon, I sorted the pictures at home. The first set from my phone showed dark trunks. The clearing's ring was a solid brown. In the middle, nothing. Then a second batch from the old point-and-shoot in my backpack captured the pale rings. The angle was slightly off, but the cut edges were there, clear and crisp. One photo stood out, a shot of Baxter sniffing at the edge. In the top right corner, where the fog hovered, the image shimmered, a faint, out-of-focus swirl like condensation on the lens. I zoomed in, but it resolved into nothing. No shape, no color. Just a blur that hadn't been visible in the live view. I've been back to that trail twice since. Each time the ground looked normal. No 6-foot rings, no bark fragments, no odd fog patches. Baxter stayed close to me, ears forward, sniffing the branches, but not whining. I keep the photos on my desk. Every so often, I pull up the close-up of Baxter in the clearing, stare at the faint swirl in the sky. I don't know what stripped those trees or why Baxter refused to cross that line. I don't know why the bark seemed to regrow overnight, but I remember the hush of that circle, the way the air bent around it, and how I fled without casting a single fishing line into my own morning calm. I was driving west on Highway 50 through eastern Colorado, well past midnight. The moon had set hours earlier, leaving the sky a deep navy, littered with stars. It was late August, but the night air was crisp, about 55 degrees Fahrenheit, so I'd cracked the windows a bit. The engine hummed at a steady 65, and I'd passed just a handful of trucks since leaving Lehman 2 hours ago. Around 1:45 a.m., I glanced up at the sky, trying to spot Orion's belt. I was counting constellations, killing time, when I noticed something odd. I had already driven maybe 20 miles since I last checked the sky, but the stars hadn't shifted. The familiar curve of Cassiopeia was still at the same angle. The Big Dipper hadn't dipped. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe I'd dozed off for a few minutes, but when I looked again, nothing had changed. I slowed the car to 50 and watched the side road markers slide past. The horizon to my left, barely more than grassland and a few scrub oaks, should have shifted relative to the stars, but the stars and landscape stayed locked in place, like a fixed image behind a windshield. My heart rate picked up. I keyed the mic on CB, channel 19. Anybody out there? Static. Sure could use company. Still nothing but hissing hiss. I gripped the wheel and drove another 5 miles, trying to shake it off. But every time I glanced up, the same star pattern hung in the same spot. No rotation, no drift. I thought maybe I'd pulled onto a hidden frontage road and gone in circles, but the mileposts kept counting down logically. At 2:15, I pulled over at a turnout just past milepost 213. The road was deserted, not even a guardrail, just gravel and a shallow drainage ditch. I killed the engine and turned off the headlights. Darkness dropped so thick it felt like velvet. I stepped out, phone in hand, but screen blank, no signal. I leaned against the hood and stared upward. The air was silent except for distant crickets and the hum of the idling engine echo in my ears. The stars flickered bright. I waited. 1 minute, then 2. Every celestial fixture stayed exactly where it had been. A cold breeze drifted across the plains, rustling the grass. The thought of turning around crossed my mind, but I felt too uncertain to move. I needed to see something else. That's when I noticed the puddle. I'd left my floor mat out to air dry, and overnight rain had filled the shallow ditch with a couple inches of water. The surface was perfectly still, reflecting the sky above. I knelt and shone my phone's flashlight on the water. The stars were mirrored there. Yes, but they moved. I watched the puddle's reflection shift slowly, almost imperceptibly. The 3 stars of Orion slid westward across the mirror surface at the pace I expected them to cross the real sky, but the actual sky stayed fixed. Both images, real and puddle, remained in perfect focus. The reflected stars marched against the still backdrop of the real ones. I pressed a fingertip to the surface. A ripple erased part of the reflection. I let the water calm, and the reflected stars reformed in new positions, farther along their path. My breath caught. I slapped at my sleeve and blinked, but it was real. The real sky and its inverted twin were decoupled. One stood motionless, the other moved on its own schedule. I felt a weight in my chest, a nausea. I backed away from the puddle and turned in the dark, scanning the horizon. No lights, no shapes. Just a silent prairie under a frozen sky. I thought, maybe it's a trick of my eyes. But every time I closed them, the internal image of moving stars hovered in my mind. When I opened my eyes, the real sky was as steady as a photograph. I stepped back into the car and locked the doors. The engine fired on the first crank. I backed off the turnout slowly, still watching in the rear view as the puddle reflected the stars tracing their arc. I pulled back onto the highway and drove east, headlights cutting through darkness. The regular hum of the engine felt reassuring. My phone found signal again around milepost 208. 1 bar, enough for a call. I thought about calling someone, but I couldn't think what I'd say that wouldn't sound insane. By the time I reached Le Mans, the real sky had begun to move. The stars that had held the same position were now creeping west like the rest. I pulled into a 24-hour diner parking lot and sat for 10 minutes, engine idling, watching the sky. The puddle reflection was gone back on the plains, replaced by dry gravel. When I finally drove home, the sky was paling. Dawn was coming. I drove the rest of the way in silence, not touching the radio. I pulled into my driveway, cut the engine, and sat for a long moment in the pastel light, wondering which sky was real and which was the echo. We'd been out in the woods for almost 3 hours by the time it started. My girlfriend, Elena, and I had set up camp in this clearing deep in the Cascades, probably a good 5 miles from the nearest trailhead. We'd gone looking for some quiet, a weekend away from phones and noise. It was early September, the kind of night where the air holds that first crispness of fall, but the sun still sets late enough to leave a little warmth behind. We got the tent pitched around 6:30 p.m., just as the light was beginning to soften. Elena was unpacking the cooler while I stacked firewood. The trees around us were tall, mostly fir and cedar, thick trunks with branches that tangled up high enough to blot out most of the sky. We'd planned on making dinner over the fire, roasting some sausages, and having hot cocoa afterward. Pretty simple stuff. After the sun finally dipped below the ridges, we settled near the fire pit. The flames flickered orange, casting loose shadows across the dirt and the base of the trees. We sat close, backs resting against the cool trunks. Elena was humming quietly, poking at the fire with a stick. I remember the way the woods felt then, alive but still, like everything was waiting. It wasn't the usual forest sounds either, like the chirping of crickets or the rustling of small animals. That night was quiet in a way that made you lean in and listen harder. That's when I heard it the first time. A faint whisper, barely louder than the breeze, coming from somewhere past the tree line about 50 feet away. It was a voice saying my name, just Jason. Soft, clear, no echo, no repetition. I looked over at Elena. She froze too, eyes wide. We both heard it, no doubt. "Did you hear that?" I asked. She nodded, but didn't say anything. I stood and scanned the shadows between the trees. No flash of movement, no glowing eyes, just darkness. We figured maybe it was another camper calling out. We yelled back a few times, but got no reply. Then it happened again. This time it was both of our names whispered, back to back. Jason, Elena. No echo, no rustling leaves, no footsteps. Just the names, breathy and soft, like someone leaning in close to whisper, but nowhere near us. We both felt our skin tighten, but neither of us wanted to break the silence. We just sat frozen, eyes darting through the tree line. The weird part was how the voices sounded. Not strained or distant. Almost like someone was right next to us. But there was no one there. No movement, no light, no other signs of life beyond the faint crackling of our fire. I pulled out my phone to check the time, 9:13 p.m., but no signal, as expected. We decided to pack up and hike back the way we came, thinking maybe it was some prank or an animal making strange noises. As soon as we zipped the tent and stood up, the whispering stopped. The hike out was silent, just the crunch of our boots on dry leaves. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone trailing us. But the woods were still. Once we reached the parking area, we both let out breath we didn't realize we'd been holding. Elena broke the silence first, laughing nervously. "That was something," she said. "Yeah," I agreed. But I was still thinking about how those whispers didn't sound like an echo or a trick of the wind. The whole way home, the weird feeling stayed with me, like we'd been watched or followed by something unseen. It wasn't just the names. It was the way the forest had shifted around us, the way silence had swallowed the usual sounds. I don't know if I'll go back to that spot anytime soon, but every time I close my eyes at night, I hear those whispers again, just faint enough to make me wonder if it was real or if I'm just remembering wrong. I was hiking alone in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, late September of 2022. My name's Emma Collins, and I usually spend a good chunk of my weekends on trails, especially in the fall when the leaves turn. That year, I'd taken a few days off work and decided to tackle a lesser-known path near Franconia Notch State Park. It was supposed to be a quiet, easy 3-mile loop called the Pemi Trail, mostly wooded with some open views. I started mid-morning when the weather was cool but dry, a crispness in the air that hinted at early autumn. The sky was partly cloudy, with patches of sun slipping through the treetops as I walked. The forest was mostly quiet except for the usual sounds, birds, the crunch of my boots on leaves, and the occasional rustle of squirrels or chipmunks. About an hour into the hike, I stopped near a small clearing by a stream to drink some water. That's when I noticed the stone. It was lying just off the path, partly buried under some fallen leaves and twigs. At first, I thought it was just a smooth rock someone had left behind. It was unusual looking, perfectly circular, maybe the size of a hockey puck, and the surface was almost glassy but matte, like polished river stone, only more uniform. I picked it up without much thought. As soon as it was in my palm, I noticed a faint vibration, almost like a very low hum. It wasn't loud at all, barely audible, more like a sensation you could feel through the skin rather than hear with your ears. I tilted the stone close to my ear, and the humming got a little clearer, steady but soft, almost soothing. I checked around to see if anyone else was nearby, but the trail was empty. I didn't know what to make of it, but I slipped the stone into my jacket pocket and kept walking. For the next half hour, the humming stayed with me, like a quiet buzz that seemed to come from the stone itself. I wasn't sure if it was in my head, but every time I reached into my pocket, I felt it there. It wasn't unpleasant, just odd, like the stone was alive in some way. Then things started getting strange. I remember looking up and realizing I'd passed a marker for the trail junction earlier than I thought. The trees seemed thicker, and the path wasn't as clear as it had been. I wasn't lost exactly, but something felt off. I stopped and pulled out my phone to check my GPS, but the signal was spotty, which wasn't unusual in that part of the woods. I noticed the humming was stronger now, almost like it was responding to the environment. Then I realized something. Every time I slowed down or stopped moving, the hum got louder. When I walked faster, it faded. It was like the stone was reacting to me. That's when I noticed the trees around me. The branches were thicker, and there was this dense, unnatural quiet. Not just a lack of animals, but a sort of soundlessness. The usual forest noises were missing. No birds, no insects, no wind in the leaves. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. I stopped to catch my breath and held the stone up. The hum was definitely coming from it, steady and vibrating through my fingers. I looked around, feeling a little uneasy. I put the stone back in my pocket and took a few steps forward, toward a bend in the trail where the sun peeked through the branches. That's when the hum stopped, completely, like someone had flipped a switch. I stopped walking and waited, but nothing changed. No hum, no vibration. I pulled the stone out again, holding it in my hand, but it was silent now, just cold and smooth. I stepped back a few paces, curious if maybe I had crossed some invisible boundary. The moment I moved backward toward where the hum had been stronger, it came back, just as low and steady as before. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe I was imagining it, but the pattern was clear. Step forward past that point on the trail, and the stone was dead silent. Step back, and it started humming again. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but part of me wanted to keep going, to see how far the silence stretched. The trail in front of me led into a thicker cluster of trees, darker under the afternoon sky. I debated turning around, but something kept me rooted there, standing just on the edge of that silent zone. I looked down at the stone, cold and quiet in my hand, and felt a faint sense of pressure, like the stone was urging me not to cross the line. After a minute, I turned and walked back toward the clearing where I'd found it. The hum started again as soon as I passed that invisible line. I tucked the stone back into my pocket and kept walking, not looking back. The rest of the hike was uneventful, but I kept feeling like I was being watched. The forest seemed to close in around me differently than usual, shadows lingering a little too long. I quickened my pace and made it back to the parking lot just before dusk. I tried to research the stone later, but nothing came up. No local legends, no geological matches, nothing. I still have it in a box on my shelf. It doesn't hum anymore, no matter what I do. But I know that day, on that trail, something was different. Something I can't explain. I don't know why the stone reacted that way or what the silent boundary was, but it felt like crossing it might have changed something. I never went back to finish that hike. I was out in the fields just past midnight when I first saw it. I'd been checking on the sheep, like I usually do before heading back to the house. The night was clear and cold, the kind of late spring night where the air still feels sharp but the frost is gone. The moon was high and bright, spilling pale light across the pasture. The sheep weren't scattered like they normally were. Instead, they were all bunched up tight in a circle, right in the middle of the field, which I thought was odd. Usually, they graze or wander off in small groups, but that night they were packed together, standing perfectly still and staring up at the sky. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just tired or something, but no. They were definitely all focused on the same spot, heads raised and eyes fixed on this shape. It was hard to make out at first because it wasn't like anything I'd seen before. Imagine a black blot against the moonlight. But it wasn't reflecting or shining or casting a shadow. It just seemed to absorb the light, like a hole in the sky. I looked up, trying to see what it was. It was big, flat, and kind of rectangular, but with edges that seemed to blur, like it was slightly out of focus or moving in some way I couldn't pin down. No stars showed up through it, and the moonlight stopped right at its edges. It didn't flicker or move much, but it didn't really sit still either. It was more like it was hovering, silent and heavy. I wanted to walk closer, but my legs felt stiff. The closer I got, the more I felt like something was wrong. My skin prickled like static electricity, but colder. And I swear I heard a faint low hum, almost like the wind, but without the usual rustling. The sheep didn't move at all, not even when I shifted my weight or made a noise. I tried calling out to them, but my voice sounded weird in the open air, distant and muffled. The circle stayed tight, unbroken. Then the hairs on my neck stood up, and I felt a pressure in my head, like someone was pressing down lightly on my temples. I blinked, and for a moment the shape almost looked like it was folding in on itself, or maybe splitting. When I looked again, it was just that flat, dark thing blocking the stars. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to get back to the house, but another part was rooted to the spot, watching this silent presence that didn't belong anywhere. I pulled out my phone, tried to get a picture, but the screen went black as soon as I aimed the camera. The flashlight wouldn't turn on either. It was like my phone just died, but I'd charged it fully before going out. The wind had died completely, the usual night sounds gone. No crickets, no distant dogs barking, no leaves rustling, just this deep silence except for the faint hum that I could still feel more than hear. I stepped back toward the house, glancing behind me. The sheep stayed where they were, staring upward, unmoving. When I got inside, I locked the door and the house felt colder than it should have. I looked out the window toward the field. The shape was still there, a black blot absorbing the moonlight like it had swallowed that part of the sky whole. I watched it for a while, but then the sheep scattered all at once, bolting toward the barn like something spooked them. I opened the door and looked out, but the shape was gone. I went out to check the field, but there was no trace of anything unusual. The grass was still damp with dew, but the soil was undisturbed. The sheep were jittery, but fine. Over the next few days, I kept an eye on the field at night. Sometimes the sheep would huddle like that again, staring up at the sky, but the shape never returned. And the sheep never acted afraid, just quiet and still, like they were waiting for something I couldn't see. I tried telling a couple of neighbors, but they thought I was messing with them or dreaming. The local vet said animals can sometimes sense strange weather or electrical storms, but the sky was clear and the weather was normal. I don't know what that thing was or why it was there. It didn't look like any cloud, drone, or plane, and it didn't behave like anything I've ever heard about. It just sat there, absorbing the moonlight, watching us, while the sheep stared up like they knew something I didn't. Since then, I keep an eye on the sky when I'm out late, but I haven't seen anything like that again. Still, sometimes when I hear the sheep quiet down in the middle of the night, I look out the window, wondering if that black shape will come back. I was flying a small private plane near Groom Lake, Nevada, on a late afternoon flight back in early April. The sky was clear with just a few wisps of cirrus clouds, and the air was crisp but calm. I do a fair amount of flying for work and pleasure, mostly around Nevada and California, but this trip was just a quick round to drop off some paperwork in Las Vegas and then head home to Reno. I was cruising at about 7,500 feet, doing a straight line southwest from Groom Lake toward Las Vegas. Nothing special about the flight so far. I'd done it dozens of times. I was in a Cessna 182, just me in the cockpit, running autopilot and keeping an eye on the instruments. The radio was mostly quiet, except for a few routine check-ins with flight control. About 40 minutes into the flight, something odd caught my eye on the right wingtip. At first, I thought it was a reflection. The sun was hitting the wing at a sharp angle and maybe the glare was playing tricks. But the thing didn't look like a typical glare or lens flare. It was this perfectly smooth, mirror-like shape, hovering about 100 feet off my right wing. I adjusted my sunglasses and leaned forward. It was about the size of a small car, maybe smaller. No visible edges or seams, just this featureless reflective surface that perfectly mirrored the sky and the wing beneath it. The reflection was so precise, it was almost like looking into a polished sheet of metal, except it wasn't part of the plane. I checked my instruments, trying to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Altimeter steady, airspeed normal. The plane was stable, no sudden turbulence. My heart rate picked up a bit. Not from fear, just surprise. I've flown a lot, and I've never seen anything like this. I reached for the radio to see if anyone else reported something in the area. Nothing. No chatter, no reports of other traffic. I tried the transponder, code 1200, the usual visual flight code. The radar was quiet, no blips anywhere near me. I pulled back the throttle a bit, watching the object as it kept pace exactly with my wingtip. It didn't move around or flicker. It stayed perfectly positioned, matching my speed and heading, almost like it was locked in. I turned the plane slightly to the left, testing if it would break formation. It didn't. The object mirrored my moves, holding its position relative to the wingtip with flawless precision. I grabbed my phone and tried to film it through the small side window, but the reflection on the glass and the speed of the plane made the image useless. Just a blur of sky and wing. I put the phone down after a few seconds, realizing this wasn't something I could capture well. For what felt like several minutes, maybe 5 or 6, the thing stayed there, completely silent, no engine noise, no lights, no vibrations, just this smooth, mirror-like shape floating beside me. The sky behind it reflected perfectly, but I could never catch a glimpse of anything inside or behind it. I tried calling flight control again. Control, this is N123DP. Do you have any traffic in my vicinity? No response. Then I checked the onboard radar scope. It was blank. No targets within a 20-mile radius. I was trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Was it a drone? But it was too big and too smooth, and I didn't hear any engines or see any propellers. Could it be a weather balloon? No. Weather balloons don't hover like that or keep pace exactly. Could it be a refraction of light or some atmospheric effect? I'm no scientist, but the sky was clear, and the thing was so well defined. After about 7 minutes, the object started to slowly pull away, moving backward relative to my wingtip. It shimmered briefly, then disappeared into the distance as if it vanished. I felt the need to verify everything again, but my instruments and plane felt fine. No warning lights, no system faults. When I landed in Las Vegas, I immediately checked the FAA traffic logs for that time. No unknown aircraft or unidentified radar blips. The tower controller told me nothing unusual had been reported. I told the people I flew with about it, but most just laughed it off. Must have been some weird glare or your mind playing tricks. But I kept thinking about how clear and solid it looked, and how the compasses and instruments didn't glitch at all. Driving home that night, I noticed a subtle hum in the car's stereo system, not coming from the speakers, but something faint beneath. I turned everything off, and it stopped. In the following days, I kept checking my flight log and the instruments that's on my plane. No errors. But sometimes, late at night, when I look at the wingtip, I swear I can feel that strange presence again. Like something's watching, just out of sight. It's the only time I've ever seen something that clearly didn't belong in the sky, and yet left no trace anywhere but my own eyes. I set out before first light, snow crunching under my boots, tracking a doe I'd glimpsed the evening before. It was late January, just after a cold front had passed through northwestern Montana. The wind had died down, leaving behind a fresh inch of powder that coated everything. I dropped my pack and knelt at the edge of the clearing where I'd parked, breathing in the sharp, pine-scented air. My name's Carson Hale, and I've hunted this stretch of Forest Road 6111 for years, but that morning felt different right away. At first light, I found the tracks, hoof prints, 2 front, 2 back, spaced like she'd been moving at a steady walk. I followed them into the pines, careful not to rustle branches or break twigs. The trees arched overhead, branches heavy with snow, and early rays of orange sun filtered through, lighting the trunks like lanterns. I checked my watch, 7:12 a.m., and kept moving. I'd left my phone off. You don't want distractions when you're alone in cold country. Birdsong was faint, just a few jays, until I poked through a stand of young firs and the forest fell silent. No wind, no birds, nothing but the echo of my own breath. I scanned left, then right, expecting a buck or even a coyote, but nothing moved. The only sign I saw was a small depression in the snow, no tracks, just a shallow bowl, like something heavy had rested there. I shrugged and walked on. The doe tracks led me downhill to a frozen creek bed. The ice was glazed clear, and I heard nothing except the snap of my gaiters on the snow. I stopped to check the hoof prints. They dipped onto the ice, slid forward a few inches, then continued. No brakes. The deer hadn't hesitated. I guess she was pushing hard to reach open ground and maybe water at a spring further downstream. I climbed back up the far bank into a wide meadow. The wind had scoured the snow here, leaving patches of hard crust and some bare grass. I followed the prints past a cluster of rocks where ravens had been scavenging. Their droppings dotted the snow, but no fresh pellets or feathers, just an empty calm. I shivered, unzipping my jacket to grab another layer, even though I wasn't cold yet. About halfway across the field, I noticed something odd. A second set of tracks, overlapping the does, but wider, deeper. They were boot prints, men's hunting boots size 10 or so, pointing in the same direction as the deer. Whoever had passed after her seemed to be trailing, not chasing. The prints were slow and deliberate. They didn't zig or wander. They cut a straight line toward the middle of the meadow. I stopped and listened. Even the snow under my boot felt muted, like the air was thick. The wind stayed gone. Not a single crow called overhead. I pulled my binoculars up to scan for movement. Nothing in the open. No figures, no movement down the tree line. The tracks ended about 80 yards ahead, in the center of the field, just where the ground sloped gently toward a hidden ravine. Then they stopped. I crouched nearby and peered at the snow. No sign of return prints. No sign of boots stumbling down the slope. No disturbance of snow crystals. It was as though someone had taken off their boots and floated away. I traced the hoof prints of the doe, converging with the boot prints at that point. But her tracks continued forward, headed where, I couldn't tell. The doe must have slipped through an opening in the brush. I stood up and tested the snow around the end of the boot prints. Just firm crust, no break. I sank in an inch. Everywhere else sank 2 or 3 inches under my weight. The ground was colder there, too. I held a gloved hand an inch above the surface and felt a sudden draft like a mini blizzard trapped under the crust. I backed up, uneasy. My heart was thumping, but I forced myself to lean in again. I looked for twig breaks or tiny scraps of cloth, anything. I saw nothing. I lifted snow to check the grass below. Untouched. I dropped the snow back in place. No footprint, no hole. I should have backed away then, but curiosity kept me rooted. I grabbed my GPS to mark the spot. It read 48.291 degrees N, 114.0498 degrees W. Save that, I thought. I panned the horizon, pines to the north, a hill to the south, the rest of the world hidden under snow. No cabin lights, no road noise, silence. I took a cloth from my pack and unraveled a strip to mark the spot around a nearby stubby tree. Tie it high, remember this place. The cloth snapped in the windless air. Even that sound seemed loud. I stepped backward, then turned to follow the doe prints again, but noticed they curved south, skirting the meadow's edge and heading into thicker woods. My stomach twisted. I'd lost the deer, but I didn't want to return to the forest alone. The scene in the open field felt too empty, like something was watching from the trees beyond. Dread crept in slow, like ice spreading under my collar. I shifted my pack higher on my shoulders and followed the doe tracks out of the meadow, boots crunching in the old snow. Back among the trees, the birds returned, one woodpecker tapping, a flock of chickadees chattering overhead. I exhaled hard. The forest regained its routine, its life. I snapped a branch to test my gun zero. Nothing unusual. I told myself it had been a hunter who'd turned back, or a hiker who'd lost his way and gone off descending. But the tracks ended too cleanly, too intentionally. No explanations felt plausible. I kept moving downhill toward the creek again, partly to stay balanced and partly to hide my faster heartbeat. By the time I reached the tree line from the clearing where I'd parked, the sun was higher, 9:10 a.m., according to my watch. I'd been out nearly 2 hours. My legs felt rubbery. I eased off my pack and slung it on the log where I'd stashed it. I looked back at the meadow, glancing once more. No flags on trees. No footprints reappeared on the snow. Just unbroken white. I walked to my truck, half expecting to see tire tracks in the lot, someone skulking back to their car. But the parking area was as empty as when I'd arrived. I unlocked the door, tossed in my shotgun and pack, and sat behind the wheel. I closed my eyes and listened once more. The engine idled, the heater kicked in, and the road beyond the gravel lot lay quiet under fresh snow. I drove home in silence. The heater warmed the cab, and I could smell damp wool in my clothes. My phone finally pinged with messages. My wife asking if I wanted breakfast. I texted back, yes, just give me 15. Inside the house, the heat felt too bright. I hung my coat and boots by the stove, then washed my gloves in the sink, flicking the cloth scrap from my pack into the trash. I stared at my reflection in the window as morning light flooded the living room. No one was outside. The road was empty. Hours later, I kept glancing out at the snowy yard, half expecting the prince to appear there too, leading nowhere. But the snow lay as it always did, untouched. I went back to my map and plotted the GPS point, zooming in until I could see the contour lines. Then I closed the map and sat back in my chair, listening to the house settle, the wind finally picking up a low howl outside. The prints still bother me. I know the woods can hide a lot. Animals, people, echoes of footsteps gone cold. But footprints ending in open snow, with no return? I've lived with wild places all my life, but nothing explains that empty field. I track game all the time, but that morning the tracks led me somewhere I can't follow. I haven't gone back yet. Maybe I will someday, or maybe I'm better off leaving the snow where it fell, covering the tracks, covering the story too. I was working a midweek shift in the forest, about 30 miles outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. My name's Carl Jensen. I do forestry work for the state, mainly monitoring tree health, checking for disease or insect infestations, and sometimes setting up equipment to measure environmental conditions like humidity and soil moisture. The area I was in that day was a section of ponderosa pines that had been off limits for a while due to wildfire risk, so it was quiet and mostly untouched. It was early morning, cool and clear, with a slight breeze that rattled the pine needles overhead. I was hiking out to a site to check on a few sensors I'd installed a few weeks earlier. Around 9 a.m., I noticed this low, vibrating hum in the air. It wasn't like any machine I'd ever heard, too deep and steady, almost like the sound of a huge engine idling far off, but I couldn't see anything. I stopped and looked around, trying to figure out what was causing it. The hum seemed to come from just beyond a cluster of trees, maybe 50 yards away. Then, without warning, this smooth, dark shape slipped silently between the trunks. I say shape because I couldn't make out any clear form. No edges, no seams, just this black mass, perfectly smooth and almost reflective in the patches of sunlight that filtered through the canopy. It moved with a fluid grace, like it was gliding rather than walking or rolling. It disappeared behind a thick stand of pines and didn't come back out. I wasn't sure what to think. Part of me wanted to follow it, but another part warned me not to. The forest was too quiet otherwise, and the usual sounds of birds and wind seemed muted, like the whole place was holding its breath. I shook my head and kept moving toward the sensors. The rest of the morning was uneventful. I did my rounds, tested the equipment, and noted the readings. But I couldn't stop thinking about that dark shape. By noon, I was back at the ranger station for lunch. It's a small, plain building with a break room where the forestry workers hang out. I was eating my sandwich and sipping coffee when a man walked in. He looked out of place, clean-shaven, with short black hair slicked back, wearing a black uniform that didn't have any patches or logos. No name tag, no badge. Just a plain black shirt and pants, the kind of outfit you'd expect from security personnel or government agents, but not someone you'd usually see around a forestry office. He sat down at my table without asking, which threw me off. I glanced at him, half expecting someone to come get him or say something, but no one else seemed to notice. He looked at my gear, lying on the table, my GPS, a handheld weather meter, and some other measuring tools. Then he asked, in a quiet but firm voice, equipment calibration. Are your instruments within acceptable parameters? I blinked, confused. Yeah, I think so. Everything checks out so far. Why? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he leaned in a bit and said, it's important to maintain accuracy. Deviations can lead to unintended consequences. Before I could ask what he meant, he stood up and walked out of the room. I turned to grab my coffee, but when I looked back, he was gone. No sign he'd ever been there. The rest of the afternoon felt strange. I kept noticing little things out of place. My GPS showed tiny jumps in my position, like I'd briefly moved a few dozen feet in a blink. The weather meter fluctuated erratically for no reason, and there was that deep hum again, faint this time, somewhere just beyond the tree line. On my way back to the truck, I caught a glimpse of that dark shape again. It was sitting on a rock, perfectly still, almost blending into the shadows. When it saw me looking, it vanished into the trees. I didn't say anything to the other forestry workers about the man in black or the shape. I wasn't sure what to make of it myself. But since that day, I've noticed strange lights flickering between the pines at night, and sometimes that low hum returns, even when no equipment is running nearby. I keep wondering if the man was warning me, or checking on something I wasn't supposed to see. Whatever it was, I don't think this forest is as ordinary as it seems. I was renting a little place in northern Vermont that winter, just outside of a town called Glover. It was a converted woodshed behind someone's farmhouse, just one room with a cot, a heater, and a desk. Cheap and quiet, which is what I needed after everything fell apart in Boston. I'd been getting deeper into backyard astronomy, real amateur stuff. Mostly star fields, meteor showers, the occasional satellite flare. My gear wasn't fancy, just a used 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain I picked up secondhand and rigged onto a Skywatcher mount. I'd set up a plywood platform behind the cabin where I could leave the tripod level and undisturbed, far enough from town to avoid light pollution and those crisp winter nights up there, some of the clearest skies I'd ever seen. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because it was the night I got the all clear to start working remotely for a graphic design firm out of Portland. I had a small celebration, a beer, a grilled cheese, and a long look at the Orion Nebula. Around 1:30 a.m., I was scanning near Betelgeuse when something odd happened. There's this one star, I still don't know what it was, off to the northeast. Not part of any major constellation, but I'd seen it before. Only this time, it blinked. Not like atmospheric distortion or clouds, but a full-on hard blink. Gone, then back. Then it flickered again, but in a weird rhythm, almost patterned. 3 quick flashes, long pause, 2 more flashes, then nothing. I kept the scope locked on it for another hour, but it just sat there like normal. I checked my notes, tried to replicate the angle, checked my lenses, power source, even swapped eyepieces, but I couldn't recreate what I saw. Eventually, I went inside, wrote it down in my logbook, and figured maybe it was just a trick of light or my own fatigue. 2 nights later, I saw someone in the woods behind the observatory window. Now, let me back up. That observatory was just a window I'd installed a blackout panel on, so I could leave the scope inside and open it out into the cold air without flooding the room with light. I didn't have a dome or anything. The telescope stuck out maybe a foot beyond the sill. Around 2 a.m., I was half dozing at the desk waiting for a patch of cloud cover to clear. When I opened my eyes, I noticed something through the gap in the curtain. A man, standing completely still just past the edge of the tree line, maybe 30 feet away. He was looking through a telescope. Not mine, his own. A black tube on a matte black tripod, no markings I could see. He was tall and very thin, wearing a black overcoat and dark slacks, no gloves, even in the snow. His skin looked almost bluish in the moonlight. He didn't move. At first I thought maybe it was a prank, someone from town messing with me, but there were no footprints in the snow leading to where he stood. Nothing. The snow had fallen fresh earlier that afternoon, at least 2 inches, and it was perfectly undisturbed. I watched him for maybe 10 minutes. He didn't shift or adjust the scope, didn't take notes, just stood there, eyes to the eyepiece, like he was watching something intently. Eventually I closed the blackout panel and just sat on the floor, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to go outside, and calling the police felt stupid. What would I even say? When I looked again, just before dawn, he was still there. By the time the sun came up, he was gone. No tracks, no scope, no trace he'd ever been there. I tried to forget about it. I didn't mention it to the owners of the farmhouse. I just stopped using the scope for a while. But 2 days later, I found something taped to the outside of the observatory window. It was a piece of black paper about the size of a bookmark. On it was a perfect white circle, centered, nothing else. No tape edges, no moisture damage despite the snow. It wasn't there when I went to bed. I didn't touch it. I left it there for hours. Around noon, it was gone. No wind that day, no footprints. The week after that, strange things kept happening. The power in the cabin flickered, but never fully went out. My telescope mount began to drift, just slightly, a few degrees off, no matter how often I recalibrated. One night, I found the scope turned toward the woods, even though I hadn't touched it. Then came the whispering. It wasn't voices, not exactly. More like a mechanical hum, buried just low enough in frequency that I couldn't tell if it was in the air or in my ears. Only happened at night. I tried recording it, but the playback always came out blank. One night, I heard footsteps crunching the snow around the cabin. Not fast, not approaching, just a slow circle. I shut off the lights and waited. Nothing. When I opened the door, the yard was empty. That's when I stopped sleeping altogether. I moved the telescope into the cabin and locked the window shut. I sealed the blackout panel and taped it from the inside. I even started keeping a knife by the bed, which I hated doing, but I couldn't shake the feeling someone was just watching. On my last night there, the stars disappeared. Not behind clouds, just gone. I stepped outside around 11 p.m. to check on the satellite dish after a dropped connection. The sky was clear, moonless, but there were no stars, just pitch black void. I waited, 15-20 minutes, still nothing. Then the stars came back, all at once. Same position, same brightness, just back. The next morning I packed everything I owned into the truck and left before sunrise. I didn't tell the farmhouse owners. I didn't say goodbye. I just drove. That was a year ago. I haven't used the telescope since. I was out by the river just before dusk, hoping to get some good shots of the herons and kingfishers that come around this part of the forest in late summer. I've been a wildlife photographer for years, mostly freelance, mostly small assignments, or just personal projects. I have a cabin deep in the woods of northern Minnesota, miles from the nearest town. The river runs right behind it, wide and slow moving, and it's a good spot for catching animals coming to drink or fish passing through. That evening, the air was still and warm, and the sky was a faded orange-gray, the kind of light that's tricky but rewarding if you're patient. I was sitting on a fallen log near the water's edge, my camera on a tripod aimed toward a bend where the trees cast long shadows. I'd been shooting for maybe an hour, mostly birds landing on branches or a beaver swimming by. When I got home and started unloading the photos, I noticed something weird. In a few shots, there were these shapes in the river, like dark, irregular forms floating just beneath the surface. They didn't reflect the sky or trees, didn't look like rocks or logs. They were smooth and matte, almost like shadows but more solid, and they didn't change between frames even though the water moved around them. At first, I thought it was some trick of the light or a camera glitch, so I deleted the shots and kept going. But the next day, I went back and set up in the same spot. Same time of day, same light conditions. The shapes showed up again. I zoomed in and tried different angles, but they always seemed to be there, just below the surface, unmoving and oddly distinct. I mentioned it to a friend who joked it was river spirits or something, but I wasn't convinced. It felt more like something off. 2 nights later, I was sitting on my porch editing photos on my laptop. The woods were quiet except for the occasional chirp of crickets and the slow rush of the river. My cabin is pretty remote, so I was surprised when I heard a car pull up the gravel driveway. I didn't recognize the make or model, and it was late enough that I wasn't expecting visitors. A man got out, dressed in a black suit that looked a bit out of place in this setting. No tie, but a crisp white shirt and polished shoes. He didn't knock or ring the doorbell. He just walked right up to the porch. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. "I'm sorry to intrude. I'm interested in some photos you've taken." I wasn't sure what to say. "What kind of photos?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open, but not showing me anything. "I believe you have images that capture certain anomalies in the river nearby. It would be helpful if I could review your camera's memory card." I stepped back, suddenly uncomfortable. "I don't think that's necessary." He nodded as if I hadn't spoken, then took the camera off the table and slid out the SD card. I realized I hadn't even locked the door. Please put that back, I said. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned the card over in his fingers like he was weighing it. Then he said quietly, "Water keeps its own secrets. Sometimes those secrets aren't meant to be uncovered." I felt a chill even though it wasn't cold out. "Who are you?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "Just someone who wants to help you avoid trouble." I looked around. The porch light flickered, and for a moment the woods beyond looked darker than they should have been, like a shadow pressing in. When I looked back, the man was still staring at the card. I moved toward him slowly. "Give that back." Without another word, he popped the card back into my camera and handed it over. Then he turned, got back in his car, and drove off without a word. I locked the door and sat down hard, the camera still warm in my hands. I thought about calling someone, the police maybe, but there wasn't much to report besides a stranger who showed up at my remote cabin. No forced entry, no threats, just that eerie warning. The next day, I went back to the river to see if I could figure out what those shapes were. The water looked normal, clear, slow, nothing unusual. But when I raised my camera and looked through the viewfinder, I saw them again, the same shapes lurking just beneath the surface. I took some pictures and later that night tried to examine them more closely on my laptop. When I zoomed in, the shapes looked like they were made of something solid but dark. No reflection, no texture, just shapes that didn't belong in the water. After that, I started noticing other things. At night, when I went outside to check the perimeter, I'd catch glimpses of movement between the trees, always too quick to identify. Sometimes my phone would die suddenly when I tried to call or text. And the river, it sometimes made a low hum, almost like a vibration under the water, but only at dusk and only near where I'd been photographing. I didn't tell anyone except a few friends who thought I was imagining things or stressed out from being alone all the time. But I knew something had changed. The man's words stayed with me. Water keeps its own secrets. I haven't gone back to the river after dark since. The shapes are still there in the photos, always just below the surface, like silent watchers. Sometimes when the wind is still and the river moves quietly, I swear I can feel something watching me from the trees. But when I turn, there's nothing but shadows. I keep thinking about that man in black and his warning, about how some things are better left undisturbed. I'm not sure what the river is hiding, but I'm pretty sure it's not natural. I'm writing this because I want someone else to know. Maybe there's something out there paying attention to the quiet places we forget. Maybe some secrets are alive and they don't want to be found. It was late October, a Thursday, and I was driving home from work through the outskirts of New Richmond, Wisconsin. The sky was mostly clear, but there was a cool, damp feeling in the air, like the kind of chill that clings to your skin when the sun's just dipped below the horizon and the night is starting to settle in. I was a few miles past the local power plant, the large coal-fired one that everyone in town jokes about but relies on, when I noticed something off. I'd been on that stretch of road 100 times before, usually quiet and uneventful. That evening, though, just after 7 p.m., I spotted some odd lights hovering over the power plant. They weren't the usual work lights or warning beacons on the towers. These lights were smaller, brighter, and arranged in a pattern that didn't make sense for normal equipment. They moved slowly, but deliberately, like they were surveying or scanning the facility. I pulled over to the side of the road, curious but cautious. I kept my headlights off and rolled down my window a crack so I could listen. The air smelled faintly of ozone and burning coal, but mixed with that was something metallic, sharp and unfamiliar. The lights blinked intermittently, not like an emergency or warning, but more like a coded signal, or maybe a sequence. I reached for my phone, thinking of snapping a quick picture, but the screen was glitching, flickering on and off. I kept it off after that. I just sat there, watching as the lights shifted slowly along the perimeter of the plant, then disappeared behind one of the cooling towers. That's when I heard a car pull up behind me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but didn't see headlights, just a dark shape. The engine was quiet. The driver's side window rolled down, and a man's face appeared. He was clean-shaven, mid-40s, with slick-back black hair and a dark suit that didn't quite fit with the kind of guys I'm used to seeing around town. No badge, no identification, just a stiff smile. "Evening," he said. His voice was calm, measured, with no trace of friendliness or threat, just something cold and professional. I was already on edge, but tried to stay composed. "Evening." "Do you work at the power plant?" he asked. "No, I'm just passing through. I work downtown, over on Main Street." He nodded like that made sense. Then another car pulled up quietly behind his. The passenger door opened, and a second man stepped out. He was similar. Black suit, clean-shaven, pale, with a face that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in a while. The first man leaned closer to my window. "You said you were driving past. What time exactly did you see the lights?" "About 7:10. I was just heading home from work. They were hovering over the northern cooling towers." "Did they stay there long?" "Maybe 5 minutes. Then they moved off behind the towers and disappeared." The second man stepped forward now, folding his hands calmly in front of him. "Did you see any people around? Workers, maintenance crews?" "No, it was quiet. I didn't see anyone except those lights." There was a silence, like they were processing what I said. Then the first man said, "Do you mind if we take a look at your phone?" I shook my head. "I'd rather not." He didn't press it, which made me more uneasy. "All right, look, I don't know what those lights were, but it wasn't normal. I'm just a local. I was curious." The second man nodded slowly. "We understand. It's important that no one else talks about this. The company is already aware and handling it." I blinked. "The company?" "Yes, the power plant's management. They requested discretion." That's when the first man pulled something out of his jacket pocket, a small badge. It wasn't a police badge, more like a government ID, but the details were blurred in the dim light, and I didn't get a good look. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said, voice flat, "and your discretion." Then both men got back into their cars, which had no license plates I could see, and drove off. The second car pulled ahead and disappeared first. The first car followed, and then the road was quiet again. I sat there a minute longer, trying to shake off the creeping feeling that I'd just been watched in a way I didn't want to be. When I finally got back on the road, the power plant was dark again, just the usual orange glow from the towers. No lights, no movement. The next morning, I told my boyfriend Mark about what I saw and the two men. He was skeptical, naturally. "Maybe some government agents or company security," he said. "Probably just making sure you don't spread rumors." But I wasn't so sure. Over the next few days, I kept catching weird things. My phone acted up, cutting out calls and messages without explanation. Once, while driving past the plant in daylight, I saw a black SUV parked near the gate. The windows were tinted so dark it looked like a black hole. No one got out, and the driver's seat was empty. A few nights later, I thought I heard footsteps outside my apartment window around 2 a.m. When I looked, there was no one there, but the streetlight flickered strangely, and the air smelled metallic again. I started avoiding that stretch of road after work, taking a longer route even though it added 20 minutes to my commute. I didn't want to see those lights again, or the men in black. Weeks went by with nothing unusual until one evening I was working late at the office. It was nearly 10 p.m., and the building was empty, except for me. I glanced out the window and thought I saw a dark figure standing across the street in the shadows of a street lamp. But when I looked again, nothing was there. I keep thinking about those lights, the men and that badge I never got a proper look at. It all feels like part of something bigger I'm not supposed to know about. But I also know I'm probably just an ordinary person who stumbled onto something strange one night, and that maybe it's better left alone. I still drive past the plant sometimes, but I don't stop, and I never mention what I saw to anyone else. I was working the late shift at the old radio tower on the edge of Millbrook, a small town upstate New York. It was early November, and the night had settled in heavy and quiet, with a cold fog rolling in from the river just a mile away. The tower itself wasn't much, just a rusty metal structure with a cramped room at the top where I managed local emergency broadcasts and kept the signal running for a handful of small communities nearby. That night started like any other. I got to the tower around 9 p.m., grabbed my jacket, and climbed the spiral staircase to the broadcast room. The fog had thickened since dusk, and the windows were already streaked with condensation. The silence was absolute, except for the soft hum of the equipment and the occasional beep or click from the transmitter. Around midnight, I was going through the usual checks when the radio started to crackle with static. At first, it was normal, just interference from the weather or a weak signal from a distant station. But then the static got louder, like someone was trying to push through with a signal of their own. It wasn't any kind of code or message I recognized, just this low, drawn-out hiss that didn't belong. I adjusted the dials, trying to clear it, but the static stayed, filling the room with this eerie white noise. It was different from the usual interference, almost like it had intention behind it. I leaned closer to the microphone and stopped transmitting, thinking maybe I could hear it better without my voice cutting through. That's when I saw him. Outside the window, just past the fog, standing on the metal catwalk wrapping the tower, was a man, dressed in black from head to toe. Not the usual workman's gear or casual jacket you'd expect in this cold. No, this guy was wearing a suit, a black suit and a tie. His hair was slicked back, and his face was pale, almost too smooth in the dim light. He didn't move like a normal person, though. He stood still, almost statuesque, except for one thing. His hand was raised, palm facing me, this slow, clear gesture to stop what I was doing. I blinked, and for a second, I thought maybe I was imagining it. The fog was thick, the room was dim, and the static was still there, filling every corner of the space. But when I looked again, he was still there, unmoving, silently watching. His eyes were fixed on me, though I couldn't tell if they were dark or reflecting the faint glow from the control panel inside. My first instinct was to reach for the radio and start transmitting again, maybe call out to him, but the static rose up suddenly, cutting off my voice in a harsh burst. It sounded like interference, but it was almost like the radio itself was warning me, drowning out my words with this overwhelming hiss. I pulled back from the microphone and grabbed my jacket, my heart pounding. I watched him for a moment longer, and then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the man turned and stepped off the catwalk into the fog. The mist swallowed him whole, and he was gone. I sat there for a long time, listening to the static, the silence, the faint hum of the tower's machinery. The radio never cleared up completely. When the morning shift showed up, I told them about the static and the figure outside, but no one really believed me. They said it was probably just fatigue or the fog playing tricks. But that night was only the start. Over the next few days, my phone started acting weird. Calls wouldn't go through, texts sent themselves blank, and sometimes my screen would flicker, showing flashes of static even when the phone was off. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching me whenever I was outside or driving home in the dark. A few nights later, I was walking to my car in the parking lot behind the tower when I noticed a black sedan parked near the edge where the lot met the woods. It was the kind of car you don't see around here. Too clean, too polished, and out of place next to the pickup trucks and older sedans most folks drove. I thought about ignoring it, but then I saw two men step out, both wearing dark suits similar to the man on the tower. They moved calmly, almost like they were on a mission, but not in a hurry. One of them looked directly at me as I approached and gave a small nod. I stopped, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. "You need to be careful what you say," one of them said, voice low and serious. "Some things are better left alone." Before I could answer, they got back into the car and drove off, leaving me standing there in the cold, fog swirling around my feet. After that, the static got worse. My broadcasts would cut in and out, and sometimes, just when I was about to sign off, I thought I heard faint whispers through the radio. Nothing I could make out clearly, but it was enough to make me pause. I kept thinking about that man outside the window, the way he moved, and the warning. I never saw him or the two men again, but their presence lingered. Every time I climbed up that tower, I felt like I was being watched, like the fog itself was waiting for something. Eventually, the static faded and the broadcasts returned to normal, but the feeling didn't go away. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right and the fog rolls in thick, I swear I can hear that same hiss creeping back through the radio, soft and steady, like a warning from somewhere just beyond the trees. I'd planned that weekend hike for weeks. I needed to clear my head, get away from the city noise and deadlines. I'm Mark Reynolds, 35, and I live in Portland, but I spend a lot of time exploring the more remote parts of Oregon whenever I can. This time, I chose a trail near an old Cold War radar station up by the Cascades, not exactly a tourist spot, mostly forgotten except by the locals and a few hikers like me. It was late October, and the weather had turned cold and damp. The first evening I got there, I set up camp just past the tree line, not far from where the radar installation used to operate. Most of the concrete and metal was gone, just ruins left behind. But you could still see the foundation slabs and a few rusted antenna pieces sticking up. I was settling in around 7 p.m. when this low, deep hum started. It wasn't like any engine or animal I knew. It was constant, like a sound vibrating through the ground and air at the same time. I stopped what I was doing and listened. It was coming from just beyond the tree line. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the edge, trying to see what could be making that noise. That's when I noticed the lights. Not normal ones. These were small, moving slowly just beneath the trees, flickering faintly. They weren't like flashlights or lanterns, more like pale, bluish orbs gliding around quietly in the shadows. I squinted, but the darkness and the dense forest made it hard to tell how many lights there were or what was making them move. They didn't look like people or animals, at least not anything familiar. I backed away quietly and returned to my camp, keeping my phone ready, but not wanting to make noise. I told myself it was probably some weird kind of drone or a research team running tests, but there was no sound or chatter. Just that hum, low and unchanging. I slept uneasily, waking several times to check the sounds, but nothing else happened that night. The next day, I decided to hike further up the trail to see if I could find more signs of activity. The forest was quiet, except for the usual rustle of leaves and distant bird calls. I didn't see anything unusual. That evening, back at my cabin, which was a small, rented place about 10 miles from the trailhead, I sat outside watching the stars. It was clear and cold. Then I noticed headlights moving down the road nearby. A black sedan, maybe a late model, passed slowly. I didn't think much of it at first. People sometimes drove out here late. But then I realized the headlights were off. Completely dark. I blinked, thinking I was mistaken. But no, the car was driving with no lights on. It passed my cabin slowly, never speeding up or slowing down, just a steady pace. Then about an hour later it came back, again with no lights. This continued for the next 2 nights. Exactly every hour on the dot, that same black car drove past my cabin, always without headlights, never slowing down or stopping. I tried to flag it down the first time, flashing my flashlight, but it didn't react. No brake lights, no signals, nothing. Just the same steady drive. The whole thing felt wrong, like a scene out of a movie. I even checked if there was something wrong with the road's power lines or if there was a nearby power outage, but everything else had lights. After the 3rd night, I mentioned the car to a local guy at a diner back in town. He gave me a weird look and said, "You sure it wasn't just a truck or something?" I told him about the no headlights and the strict hourly timing. He shrugged and said, "Around here, some folks keep an eye on that place. You never know." I didn't press him for details. That same night, after the car drove by again, I heard that hum again outside the cabin. It was faint, like it was far away, but still there. I stood by the window, watching the dark forest line beyond the road, but I couldn't see anything. The next day, I tried to hike back to the radar site during daylight. The forest felt heavier, like the air was thicker. I kept looking for those strange lights, but I didn't see any. When I got back to the site, I noticed something odd. Some of the old concrete slabs looked freshly cracked, like something heavy had pressed down on them recently. I took pictures, but didn't know what to make of it. That night, I decided to pack up and leave early the next morning. The sense of being watched was getting stronger. Before I went to bed, I double-checked all the locks on the cabin doors and windows. I felt uneasy, like someone or something was lingering nearby. Just after midnight, I woke to that hum again, louder this time. It vibrated through the walls and floor, low and steady. I looked outside. The black car was back, but this time it stopped across the street, engine off, no lights on. It just sat there. I watched for what felt like forever, my heart racing. Then the car's door opened. and a figure stepped out. I couldn't see any details. Dark clothes, standing perfectly still. After a minute, the figure got back into the car, which started moving again, still no lights, and drove off. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I packed my things quickly and left. I told myself it was nothing, maybe some weird local prank or surveillance, but I kept thinking about the hum, the lights beneath the trees, and that silent car. Since then, I haven't been back near that area. Sometimes late at night, I think I still hear that low hum when the wind blows just right. I don't know what it was or who was driving that car. It's been weeks now, and I'm still not sure if any of it actually happened the way I remember, but it did. That much I know. I was hiking in the Adirondacks one early fall afternoon, trying to squeeze in a day on the trail before the weather turned colder. I'd chosen a spot called Panther Gorge, not because it was popular or anything, but because it was supposed to be quiet, a little remote, and mostly untouched. I'd been hiking alone for a few hours, the sky partly cloudy with that low, gray light that makes everything feel a bit muted. About halfway through the loop, I came to a narrow stretch of woods where the trees thickened and the path narrowed to barely more than a dirt track. The usual sounds of birds or wind in the leaves were gone. Dead silence. It was strange enough to make me stop and listen, but then there was a flash, like a camera or a lightning bug, but brighter, just for a second. The light came from just off the trail, deeper in the woods. I squinted into the shadows but saw nothing. I kept moving, but the silence stuck with me. No crunching leaves underfoot, no birds calling. It was the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound, and every time I thought I heard something, it vanished. After about 10 minutes, the trail opened up again into a small clearing near the road that led back to the trailhead parking. I was a little on edge by then, wanting to get off the trail before dark, and that's when I saw the car. It was a black sedan, the kind you see in the city, parked right there on the side of the road, engine running but no lights on. I didn't recognize the make, just a plain-looking, older model, no logos or anything. The driver's window was down, and a man was sitting inside. He looked normal at first, mid-40s, clean-shaven, dark hair slicked back, wearing a black suit and white shirt with the collar open, no tie. His expression was calm, almost unreadable, but he looked right at me. I slowed down, not sure what to expect. "You okay?" he asked, voice low but clear. "Yeah, just finished the hike," I said, but my voice sounded weird in the still air. He nodded. "The forest keeps its secrets. Respect them." I stared at him, not sure how to respond. There was something about the way he said it, like it wasn't just a casual warning, but a statement with weight. "Do you mean the light? The silence back there?" I asked, gesturing vaguely toward the trees. He shook his head slowly. "Not everything is meant to be understood. Sometimes the best thing is to walk away." I wanted to ask more, but the words caught in my throat. Before I could say anything else, he closed the window, started the engine, and the car pulled away slowly, then turned onto the road and disappeared around a bend. I stood there for a while, looking after it, feeling the cold start to creep into my bones as the sun dipped lower. The silence in the woods was still with me when I got back to my car. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was back there, whatever that flash was, it wasn't just natural. I drove home that night thinking about the man, the car, and the strange quiet. Nothing about it made sense, but part of me didn't want to figure it out either. I worked nights as a janitor on a restricted Air Force site out in Nevada from 2004 to 2006. I don't talk about it much, not because I signed anything, though I did, but because I don't like the way people look at you when you bring up that place. Everyone thinks you're either lying or crazy. I was neither. I just cleaned floors. My name never went on any permanent roster. I was technically a subcontractor through a private firm. They picked a few of us who didn't ask too many questions and gave us background checks, polygraphs, and a 2-week security orientation. We got flown in and out every week from a small civilian airfield outside Tonopah. We stayed on base 4 nights, got flown back Friday morning. No phones, no personal cameras, nothing with a signal. Most of the buildings were standard military stuff, offices, labs, hangars. You'd be surprised how boring it looked. Just concrete and metal and buzzed fluorescent lights. The things they didn't want you to see were always inside other things, usually hangars. We were assigned zones, and for the most part, we just did trash collection, floor waxing, restrooms, that kind of thing. The zones rotated each week, but one building never came up on the sheet, Hangar 4C. You could see it from the mess hall patio, squat and square, built into the red rock with no windows and a single access door on the east side. It wasn't hidden, just ignored. One of the older janitors, a guy named Lewis, told me early on, "Don't stare at 4C. Don't ask about it. Don't go near it." I thought he was joking. Then he said, "It hums." I laughed. He didn't. I didn't hear it until my third month out there. I was doing bins behind the admin building after midnight, and the air was still. I mean, dead quiet. No wind, no planes, nothing. And then, real faint, like it was coming up through the ground, I heard it. A low mechanical hum, deep and constant, like a power transformer under load. The sound had a weird vibration to it, like it tickled your ears if you stood in one spot too long. I followed it. It was louder toward the back end of the complex, where the geology got rockier. I passed two other hangars, both silent, then walked toward 4C. No lights on it, no vents or ducts or even external wires. Just solid matte black steel. But the humming was stronger there. Not louder, just thicker. I could feel it in my ankles. I stood maybe 10 feet from the door and realized my breath was fogging. It had been a warm night, mid-70s, but the air around that building felt cold. Cold enough that my fingers tingled. The door had no handle, just a card reader with a keypad. I backed away. I didn't want to be seen near it. Cameras were everywhere. I didn't tell Lewis about it, but a few days later we were mopping floors in the comms building, and he brought it up out of nowhere. Said, "Don't linger near 4C. It notices." I asked him what he meant. Just said, "Some things in there have been running longer than this base has existed. Some things aren't ours." I thought he meant old tech. Experimental engines, maybe. But the way he said it stuck with me. The humming came and went after that. Some weeks I never heard it. Some nights it pulsed so heavy it made me dizzy. Once I caught another guy, one of the new hires, standing near it at 2 a.m. with both hands on the wall like he was listening through it. I called out, and he didn't react. I had to tap his shoulder to snap him out of it. He looked pale and confused and didn't say a word. Next week, he wasn't on the flight back in. Never saw him again. They didn't tell us anything when people left. Just reassigned their zones. One night, about 6 months in, I got assigned supply inventory in a detached storage unit near 4C. It was just supposed to be counting bleach and paper towels. I was in there alone with a clipboard when the humming started, louder than I'd ever heard it. It was so intense the metal shelving rattled. Then, just like that, all the overhead lights in the unit flickered and went out. Total darkness. The emergency exit signs stayed lit, but they looked dim, like the batteries were dying. I waited, thinking it was a power blip. Then I realized I couldn't hear the air system anymore. Couldn't hear anything except that hum. I walked outside, and the first thing I noticed was the sky. It wasn't cloudy, but the stars looked wrong. The pattern of them. Orion was twisted, like someone had mirrored it. I don't know how else to say it. The base was completely dark, not a single window lit, no spotlights, no headlights, just that deep hum coming from 4C. I walked back toward the main path, trying to stay calm. I thought maybe there was a drill or lockdown I'd missed, but there were no alarms, no announcements, just me, alone in the dark. As I passed near 4C, I heard a new sound layered under the hum, like breathing. Not mine. Slow, steady inhalations, like something huge and sleeping. I swear the air coming off that building was colder than ice. I didn't stop. I walked straight to the janitor's brake trailer and sat in the dark until the lights came back on about 20 minutes later. No one else said a word about it the next morning. I asked Lewis, and he just looked at me and said, "You stayed out too long." A few months later, I got reassigned to Facility 7B, full-time. I didn't argue. It was farther from the ridge. I didn't see 4C again. When I quit the job, they debriefed me in a little white room with no clocks. The guy across from me didn't have a nameplate, just said, "You'll sign this and you'll never talk about anything you saw here." Understood? I signed, but I didn't see anything. Not really, I just heard it. Felt it. that low hum that seemed to come from under the world, and the cold that stayed on your skin even after you left. That building's probably still there, still locked, still humming. I used to work as an air traffic controller at a small FAA center on the Oregon coast near Newport. This was back in 2009. I was 29, still relatively new, only 4 years in, but I'd gotten comfortable with the rhythm of the night shifts. Fewer planes, less chatter. Mostly just cargo flights and the occasional medevac running out to Portland. The center itself was pretty bare bones. One main radar display room, a comms console, and a couple of workstations. On nights, it was usually just me and a supervisor, sometimes a third guy if they were training someone. That night, it was just me and Dan Holloway. Dan had been doing this for almost 20 years and didn't talk much unless something needed fixing. We weren't friends exactly, but I trusted him. He was one of those people who never guessed. He either knew or he said nothing. It was late, just past 2 a.m. Clear skies, smooth night, nothing on scope except a UPS flight heading south along the coast and a corporate jet out near Boise. I had a fresh cup of gas station coffee and was halfway through a crossword when something pinged on the screen. It was just a blip at first, top right corner of the radar, out over open water. The return was tagged at 80,000 feet. No transponder. Not unheard of. Sometimes military runs their stuff dark and we're not looped in, but this wasn't in any of the scheduled military corridors. I looked at Dan. He'd seen it too. He just raised his eyebrows, didn't say anything. I tried hailing it on guard frequency, standard procedure. No response. I flagged it for observation and zoomed in a little. The radar showed it holding steady for about 10 seconds, and then it dropped. Not gradually. It went from 80,000 feet to sea level, exactly 0 in one radar sweep. Less than a second. I stared at the screen, waiting for some kind of correction. Ghost returns aren't uncommon. Sometimes it's weather, sometimes it's interference, but this one held. It didn't fade or fragment like a weather return. Dan leaned over and said, real quiet, "You seeing that?" I nodded. Then the return vanished. Not off the edge of the radar. It blinked out mid-grid like someone hit a switch. No trail, no climb back up, nothing. We sat there in silence for a bit. Then I brought up the raw radar playback, hoping it was just a glitch in the system's display and the raw would make more sense. It didn't. The raw return showed the same thing. It appeared at 80,000 feet, held for a few sweeps, then dropped straight to sea level in under a second and disappeared. I ran a system diagnostic. Everything was normal. No errors, no dropped pings. I printed a hard copy of the return logs. I know I shouldn't have. I think there's inside. We weren't supposed to print unless it was going into an incident report. But it felt like something I'd want proof of later. Dan didn't say anything, just went back to his screen. Around 3:45 a.m., two guys showed up. Not in uniform, not in any vehicle we recognized. They came in through the side entrance with badge access. I didn't catch their names. They didn't introduce themselves, just said they were contract IT support from Seattle. One of them went straight to the radar terminal. The other asked Dan to show him the system logs. I asked who called them. Dan just said, "Not us." They stayed until a little after 5. When they left, the system had been rebooted, the hard drives had been purged, and every radar sweep from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. had been overwritten. I checked the printer tray for the logs I'd printed. Gone. Dan and I just looked at each other. I started to ask something, but he cut me off and said, "Don't." We finished the shift like normal. Logged a quiet night, no incidents, no unusual traffic. A week later, I got pulled into the manager's office. They said they were doing a standard review of radar proficiency. Asked if I remembered anything strange from that night. I said no, just a quiet night. They smiled and said, "Thought so," and that was the end of it. Dan transferred to Phoenix a few months later. I left the FAA entirely the year after. I've never seen anything like that again, nothing even close. But I think about it more than I probably should. My girlfriend Megan booked the place. I'd never even heard of Rachel, Nevada, until we pulled off the 375. The extraterrestrial highway signs were cute in a kind of gimmicky way, but I figured it'd just be another boring stretch of desert. We'd been on a road trip from Phoenix up to Reno, mostly just for the hell of it. hit a few ghost towns, hike around Zion, maybe try our luck at the tables for a night. Rachel was a stopover. One night. The motel was called the Moonlight Motor Inn, a row of 6 rooms shaped like a trailer from the 70s, all parked facing a cracked lot and miles of open desert. Nearest anything else was a dusty diner across the road, which looked like it hadn't changed since 1982. We checked in around 6:30, just before sunset. The guy at the front desk, older, white beard, wore a patch that said Randy, handed us a real key on a blue plastic tag. He asked where we were headed, and when I said Reno, he nodded like I'd told him we were driving to the moon. I remember he said, "You kids staying just the one night? That's smart." Then he kind of hesitated, looked out the window behind me, and added, "Don't go wandering after dark." I laughed, figured he meant coyotes or snakes or whatever. Megan didn't even hear him. She was already walking toward the room. The place was surprisingly clean inside. Stained carpet, sure, but the sheets looked fresh. There was a little table by the window, a bulky old TV, a humming mini fridge, and not much else. We dumped our backpacks and walked over to the diner while the sky turned that bright orange you only get in the desert. Dinner was basic: burgers, fries, watery coffee. The only other people there were a couple truckers playing cards in the back. The jukebox played Patsy Cline on a loop. When we asked for the check, the waitress smiled, but it was the kind of smile where the eyes don't match. Like she'd heard the same joke 1,000 times. Back at the motel around 8:15, we cracked a couple beers and sat on the curb outside the room. It had cooled down fast. Still warm, but the breeze had picked up and the stars were coming out. I don't usually notice stuff like that, but out there, it was stupid how clear the sky was. You could see the Milky Way like someone had poured salt across black velvet. We weren't even talking, just sitting there watching the sky. Megan pointed out a few constellations. She knows that stuff better than me, and I spotted a couple satellites drifting past. Everything was dead silent except for the occasional gust of wind. Around 9, maybe a little later, Megan asked, "What's that one?" I followed where she was pointing, low in the sky, just above the hills to the south. At first I thought it was a plane. Just a bright white light, steady, no blinking. It wasn't moving, not fast anyway. I said probably some aircraft from the base. I was mostly guessing. We weren't far from Groom Lake, so it made sense, but it didn't move. Not for a long time. I kept expecting it to drift like the others, or blink or shift color, but it just hung there, perfectly still. Megan thought maybe it was a star, but it wasn't in any of the usual spots, and it wasn't twinkling. Then it started to rise. Not diagonally like a plane taking off, just straight up. Smooth, controlled, too fast for a balloon or drone. Maybe a few hundred feet, maybe more. Hard to tell with no point of reference. We both stood up. Megan was squinting. I remember her saying, "That's not right." Then it split. 1 second, it was a single white dot. The next, there were 2, side by side, about a thumb's width apart if you held your hand up to the sky. No flash, no flare, just a clean separation. The second light hadn't moved into view. It had come from the first. We stood there frozen, not sure what we were even looking at. Both lights hovered for maybe 10 seconds. Then, and this is the part that still messes with me, they blinked out. Not faded, not flew off, just gone, like flipping off a switch. No contrail, no sound, no afterglow. 1 second they were there, the next they weren't. I looked over at Megan. She wasn't blinking, just staring at where they'd been. I asked, "Did you see that?" She nodded. "Yeah." We stood there another few minutes waiting for them to come back. They didn't. I scanned the sky. No planes, no satellites, just stars and more stars. We went inside around 9:30. I locked the door, which I never bother with at motels, and we didn't talk much after that. Megan sat on the edge of the bed, quiet. I turned on the TV for noise, but all we got was static. The screen flickered, then turned blue. No signal. I figured the place just didn't pay for cable anymore. Tried my phone, no bars, not even one. Megan checked hers, same. The signal hadn't dropped earlier. I'd gotten texts from my brother when we were at the diner. We left the TV on anyway, just for the light. Around 1 a.m., Megan woke me up. She was standing by the window. I asked what was wrong and she whispered, "Something's out there." I got up and looked. Nothing but dark desert and the faint outline of the hills. The security light above our room was flickering, but it had been doing that earlier too. Then I saw it. Not in the sky, on the ground, way out past the lot, maybe 100 yards into the scrub. A faint glow, like someone holding a flashlight, but the light didn't spread. It just sat there, perfectly round, maybe the size of a softball. Megan said, "It's moving." And it was, drifting slowly, just above the ground. No beam, no footsteps, just a silent white sphere gliding left to right in a straight line. Then it stopped, hovered. I shut the curtain. We didn't sleep. Just sat there in the blue TV light, not saying much. At some point, the signal came back and a news anchor's voice filled the room, but I didn't pay attention to what he was saying. By morning, everything looked normal. Sky was pale blue. The diner had fresh coffee. The same two truckers were still there, playing cards like they hadn't moved. We checked out around 8. Randy was gone. Some woman in her 40s sat at the desk and gave us a polite smile like we'd never met before. As we pulled out of the lot, I looked back. Nothing in the sky, nothing in the hills. But the TV signal stayed strong the rest of the trip, and the stars never looked that clear again. We hiked in through the eastern edge of Lassen National Forest, somewhere near Cinder Cone. I don't remember the trail name now. It wasn't marked all that well, and neither of us cared. Kayla just wanted to get off the grid for a few days. No cell service, no traffic, just quiet. We packed light, 1 tent, 2 sleeping bags, basic gear, a jet boil, trail mix, canned soup. Kayla carried her big old cannon with the strap fraying at the edges. She took pictures of everything. The trees, the trail, the sky, me trying to light a fire. I used to make fun of her for it. She said she liked keeping proof of the small stuff. The first night, we set up camp by a shallow creek, maybe 4 miles in. No one else was around. We had the place to ourselves. After dinner, we sat by the fire and talked about how weird it felt not to check our phones every 10 minutes. She joked about deleting Instagram when we got back. She never would have done it. She loved posting. That night, around 3 a.m., something woke me up. At first, I thought it was the wind. The tent fabric moved like something had brushed it, but the trees were totally still. I sat up and unzipped the flap to check, but nothing was there. No animals, no sounds except the creek. I looked over. Kayla was zipped into her bag, back turned toward me. The next morning, she asked if I'd gotten up at night. I said, yeah, kind of. She said she thought she'd heard whispering, but figured it was a dream. I didn't hear anything like that. We kept hiking the next day. She was quiet for most of it. Normally, she talked a lot when we walked. Random facts, stories, stuff about her job. But that day, she just walked ahead, snapping pictures. Late afternoon, clouds started building fast. We weren't expecting rain, but it rolled in hard and fast, soaked us before we could set up the tent. We found a spot under some thick pines and made a sloppy camp. Everything was damp, and Kayla's camera fogged up. At some point, she said, "It feels off up here." I asked what she meant. She shook her head, like we're being watched. That night, I had a dream, or something like one. I saw a light outside the tent, bright white, but it didn't flicker or move like a flashlight. It just hovered. I couldn't move my arms or legs, couldn't even call out. I felt like something was right outside, just behind the fabric. The air inside the tent felt too heavy to breathe. Then I blacked out. When I woke up, it was morning. The tent was still zipped. Kayla was gone. At first, I figured she'd gotten up early to pee or take pictures, but her camera was still in the tent. That was strange. She never went anywhere without it. Her boots were gone, so I figured she'd just gone for a quick walk. An hour passed, then 2. I walked a full circle around the area, maybe a half mile out. Called her name. Nothing. By noon, I was yelling. I climbed up onto a rock ridge to get a better view and just spun in circles, scanning the forest for her. But there was no sign. Not even footprints in the soft dirt around our site. Around 2 p.m., I panicked and left everything but my phone, which still had no signal. I marked a waypoint on my GPS app and started hiking back out, fast. It was dusk when I reached the trailhead. I drove until I had a bar of service and called 911. Search and rescue was dispatched by nightfall. They made me wait with a deputy at a ranger station while the first group went up. They found our campsite the next morning. My tent, our food, her sleeping bag, but no sign of her. Then things got weird. They asked me to send them any photos I had of her. I said she'd taken most of them on her Canon, but I had a few on my phone, from earlier hikes, past trips, plus the one I took of her by the creek that first night. I opened my gallery to show them. It wasn't there. I thought maybe I'd accidentally deleted it, so I checked the trash folder. Nothing. Then I scrolled through every photo I had from the last year. There wasn't a single picture of Kayla. Not from the campsite, not from the road trip down from Eugene, not from anything. It made no sense. I had photos from the grocery run the day before we left. I had a blurry selfie I remembered taking of both of us at the gas station, but now it was just me in the frame. I told the deputy it had to be a glitch. Maybe my phone corrupted something or the cloud backup failed. He nodded but didn't say much. They asked for her full name. I said Kayla Darnell, spelled it out, gave her birthday, where she worked, everything I knew. They ran it and came back saying there was no record of anyone by that name in Oregon. I thought maybe they had the spelling wrong, so I pulled up my texts to show them messages from her. There were none. Not a single message from her number. I scrolled through months of conversations. Nothing. I checked my contacts. Her number wasn't saved. My call log had no history of us talking, even though we'd confirmed the trip just 3 days before. I gave them the number anyway. They dialed it. Disconnected. When I got back to my apartment, I opened my laptop and pulled up my social media. Kayla wasn't in any of it. No tags, no comments, no likes. We'd been friends for almost 3 years. We met at a film festival in Bend. She'd introduced me to half the people in my network. She'd posted pictures of us hiking dozens of times. Now there was nothing. Not even her profile. I checked mutual friends. No one seemed to know who I was talking about. I called people, old coworkers, a guy she dated last winter. They didn't remember her. When I went to our usual coffee spot and asked the barista if she remembered Kayla, dark blonde hair, wore that denim jacket with the patches, she said, "Sorry, don't think so." I went to the art supply store where Kayla used to work weekends. Same thing. No one recognized the name. But the tent was still packed with 2 sleeping bags when I got home. Hers was blue. The tag inside said K. Darnell in Sharpie. The weirdest part is, I still remember things she said. Specific things, jokes, little phrases. One time she called ferns forest squid, and I still think about that when I see them. It's like she's there in my head, but the world decided she never was. I was working out of a temporary botany field lab in central Utah. Just me and a generator about 100 miles from the nearest town. Nothing but sandstone and sagebrush for miles. The station sat in a narrow gulch just south of the San Rafael Swell, backed up against a small bluff. The place was meant for one person. Tiny living quarters, attached greenhouse, minimal everything. I was cataloging some genetically variant buckwheat strains and monitoring soil chemistry. Real quiet work. Solitary. That week, the weather had been dry and still. Too still, actually. Not a breeze, not a cloud. The air felt stale, like the whole landscape was holding its breath. My greenhouse windows stayed wide open all day and the air didn't move. Even the insects were sparse. It made the heat sit differently. Heavy, even at night. It started with the soil sensors blinking out. I had 6 of them buried in different corners of the greenhouse. All custom rigged with a little Arduino array I put together myself. They tracked temperature, moisture, and pH, sent the data to my laptop over Wi-Fi every 10 minutes. Worked great until Tuesday morning. I woke up, checked my charts, and saw a 5-hour gap from midnight to just before 5. The whole system had flatlined. Then it picked back up like nothing happened. I thought maybe the Wi-Fi had gone out, but my laptop was still online and the generator hadn't shut off. I double-checked the timestamps. It wasn't a power thing. That afternoon, I opened up the greenhouse and noticed one of the hanging LED grow lights had shorted. The plastic casing was warped. Looked half melted, like someone had taken a blowtorch to the edge of it. It wasn't close enough to any heat source for that to happen naturally. It also wasn't hanging straight anymore. The wires had pulled loose on one side. I replaced it and chalked it up to a freak electrical issue. Maybe the wiring had been bad from the start. The next night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sensor alarm chirping. 3 short beeps, meaning a pH drop below 4.0. That's a serious acid spike and totally unheard of for that soil. I pulled on my boots, grabbed a flashlight, and headed out to the greenhouse. The air was wrong. It smelled like burned dust, not smoke exactly, just scorched minerals. The kind of smell you get when lightning strikes near rock. When I opened the greenhouse door, the humidity hit me like a wave. It wasn't supposed to be humid. I hadn't watered that evening, and it hadn't rained in days. Still, the inside of the glass was fogged. I stepped in and froze. Every single plant had turned. They weren't like that when I went to bed. I checked them myself, did a round with the notepad, checked the roots on the gallium hybrids, misted the ferns. Everything was fine, but now every pot had rotated, not toppled or dragged, turned, as if each one had been gently swiveled in place. All of them were facing inward, toward the center of the greenhouse. There, right where the soil sensors converged, was a bare patch of dirt, just a meter wide. I hadn't planted anything there. I'd left it open for new specimens. The soil was disturbed, not dug up, but pushed down in a smooth, even circle, like something had been resting there. There were no prints, no marks, just a shallow depression, and above it, the glass ceiling was scorched, faint but visible. A black, smoky outline fanned outward in a ring, maybe a foot across. The glass wasn't cracked, but it had spider-webbed faintly in the center of that black mark. The metal framing around it had a shimmer, heat distortion, like it had been warped microscopically. I didn't go any closer. I just backed out of the greenhouse and locked the door. The next morning, I checked the cameras. I had one camera set up in the greenhouse for time-lapse growth tracking. It took a still every 30 seconds and compiled a composite each day. I opened the folder for the previous night and let the video play. The plants were normal until about 12:47 a.m. Then the footage glitched. One frame showed static. After that, the next frame was totally black and the following one was blank white. The timestamp jumped forward 4 hours. I looked through the raw stills. Every file between 12:47 and 4:51 was corrupted, unreadable, nothing but digital noise. I pulled the card, ran a recovery program. It found 437 images marked as missing or partial. I clicked through the thumbnails. Most were garbage, data fragments. A few showed brief flashes of color, violet, pale green, like the lens had caught a sudden burst of light. One had what looked like a curve of something smooth and metallic in the top right corner. Too blurry to tell. No identifying features. I deleted the corrupted files and shut the camera off. I haven't turned it back on since. That day, the plants started acting strange. Some of the gallium leaves curled inward, like they were trying to close around something. The stems on 2 of the wild barley pots bent 90 degrees toward that central bare spot and stayed that way even after I rotated the pots again. I tried moving one of the ferns back to the edge of the bench. Next morning, it was tipped over, facing the center again. On Thursday night, I stayed up, sat in the greenhouse in a chair, flashlight in my lap. I didn't know what I expected to see. Around 1:30, the temperature dropped, fast. I had a thermometer out and watched it fall from 77 degrees Fahrenheit to 61 degrees Fahrenheit in under 5 minutes. Just in the greenhouse, the air felt charged. My hair stood up on my arms. The LED lights flickered, then shut off completely. Then it was quiet. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 10. The silence was total. No generator, no wind, not even the distant whine of insects. Just stillness. I didn't hear or see anything else. But when I turned my flashlight back on, the bare spot in the center looked darker than before. Like the soil had been wet, but it hadn't rained. The plants were tilted again, just slightly. The next morning, I found all 6 of the soil sensors burnt out. The plastic casings were bubbled and the wires had melted into the dirt. My laptop was fine. Nothing else in the greenhouse was damaged. That was my last day out there. I radioed in, told them I was cutting the trip short due to a hardware malfunction. They didn't question it. Before I left, I scooped a small sample of the soil from the center patch. Brought it back in a sealed jar. It's still on a shelf in my apartment. It dried out over the next few days. The color shifted, started as a dark red, now it's more gray. There's a faint ring around the inside of the glass where the soil doesn't stick, like something pushed outward from the center and left a residue. Sometimes when I walk past it, I swear I can smell that same burned dust. But only for a second.